Chapter 163. Meng Qi and Li Che blinked, nodded at the same time, and said, "Oh." Then, their gazes returned to the injured female spell cultivator. "No wonder," Li Che mumbled softly. "I once saw a record in a book about the sword aura injuries of the major sword cultivation sects in the 3,000 worlds." He paused here and recalled the record he read in the book. The Broken Space sect likes to use narrow swords. They are sharp and swift. The sword aura often penetrates the body and injures the spirit sea. Li Che said, "That's why when one is injured by the Broken Space sect, it's fine if it's just external injuries. But if the spirit sea is damaged, it usually takes months or even years to recover." "Oh." Meng Qi pressed his finger on the female spell cultivator's forehead and said, "I also saw a similar book. Not only can the Broken Space sect leave a sword injury on the cultivator's spirit sea, it's also not entirely because of the sword aura." She paused and said, "The Broken Space sect has been passed down since the ancient times. They have part of the inheritance of spell formations." "Sword formation?" Li Che asked. "Sword formation is part of it," Meng Qi said, "but they can integrate the spell formation into their sword moves." She thought for a while and changed her explanation. "The cloud-treading peak cultivates both sword arts and spells, so the people they injure usually have external injuries and the 5 elements injuries caused by their spells." "I understand now." Li Che suddenly clapped his hands. "The Broken Space sect is an external injury plus a spell formation injury." "That's right." Meng Qi smiled slightly. "Unfortunately, spell formation cultivators are rare nowadays. We rarely see spell formation injuries. Spell formations contain too many things. I can't explain it clearly in a short time," Meng Qi said. "For example, my silver needles used a spell formation. They can carry the medicinal aura on the needles and send it into the meridians. I've seen the Broken Space sect sword formation. The sword formation is fine, but I think Daoist Xiao should also be using a spell formation to carry the sword aura. That's why it can injure the spirit sea." The green-robed girl furrowed her brows and continued. "Coincidentally, this fellow Taoist had exhausted his spirit chi, and the sword chi took the opportunity to enter. That's why his spirit sea was injured. So that's how it is." Li Che's thoughts wandered. To think that formations have such a magical effect. His eyes suddenly lit up. "Magic arrays can carry sword chi. If we can carve a magic array on the elixir, then the elixir can carry the medical cultivation method. Wouldn't that be? Li Che suddenly remembered. "I remember that Master once saw a medicine like this in the heavens beyond heaven. He carved a formation on the pill, and the formation carried the medical cultivation method. The pill and the medical cultivation method strengthened each other, and the medicinal effect was greatly improved. It said that even though the Dark North pills are the lowest grade, they are directly auctioned off in sky beyond heaven. Moreover, there are very few of them. Our Azure Sea Academy can't afford them." Speaking of this, he couldn't help but sigh. A medical cultivator who can think of this method is truly a genius. Formation cultivators have been in the 3,000 worlds for a long time. I'm afraid that only an ancient medical cultivation sect like the Wind Alliance can produce such a genius. Li Che paused and then said, "It would be great if every medical cultivator knew this method." "Oh." Meng Qi's eyelashes fluttered as he responded in a low voice. The two of them continued to chat, and their hands didn't stop. The female spell practitioner who was lying on the ground suddenly moved her arm slightly. She let out a low groan and slowly opened her eyes. "You." The first thing she saw wasn't Meng Qi and Li Che squatting on the side, but Xiao Ran standing behind them with a sword. The young female cultivator's fingers trembled, and a blooming rose appeared in her palm. The rose's petals had just been dyed red when they disappeared in her palm. Her arm also fell, and her long eyelashes fluttered. Her pale lips couldn't say another word. "Be careful." Li Che pressed his fingers together and gently pressed them on the female cultivator's forehead. Then he stuffed a blue Dark North pill into her mouth. "Fellow Taoist, your spirit energy has been depleted and cracks have appeared in your spirit sea. Don't force yourself." As he spoke, he motioned to Meng Qi to help the female cultivator lie down. Xiao Ran shrugged and looked helplessly at the two of them busying themselves. Only when the female cultivator lay down behind a relatively safe wall did he ask, "What's going on with you two?" As he spoke, he looked at Meng Qi and then at Li Che. "Why are you two together? Who is this person?" Li Che was stunned and subconsciously turned to look at the green-clothed female cultivator standing beside him. Xiao Ran was annoyed, but he couldn't help but laugh. "Have you two forgotten that you're still on the battlefield of 10 ultimates?" He pointed at Meng Qi and then at Li Che. "According to the rules, you two belong to different camps. Why are you here?" Meng Qi asked. She stared at Xiao Ran's eyes. His eyes were clear and bloodless. He didn't seem to be affected by the Thousand Emperor's bell at all. "We were going to the other side of the wall when we heard the bell and the sound here. So I came over to take a look," Xiao Ran said. He looked around. "What's going on here?" "I just saw Master. He said he wanted to meet the Thousand Emperor's bell." "Junior sister Meng, what's that?" "Junior sister." Li Che looked at Xiao Ran and then at Meng Qi. "We'll talk about this later." Xiao Ran waved his hand. "Where did Master go?" "The Thousand Emperor's bell." Meng Qi said, "Didn't you hear the bell?" "No." Xiao Ran shook his head. "If there really was a bell, even if I didn't hear it, fellow Taoist Pei and his shitty would have heard it." Meng Qi's heart skipped a beat. He vaguely felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what it was. "This place," Xiao Ran said and looked around. He was confused. "Why is it so messy?" The Heaven Barracks and the Earth Barracks were already in a mess. They had fewer people, but looked like the Earth Barracks practitioners were also fighting with their own people. Xiao Ran couldn't understand it all. Meng Qi was about to answer when Li Che suddenly exclaimed softly, "Be careful!" As he shouted, he stepped forward and circled behind Meng Qi. A tall Xiozha just happened to fall from the sky. His life bond sword was broken into 2 pieces, clang, clang, clang. One in front of the other fell beside him. Even though Li Che was a medical practitioner, he was still a practitioner who was about to reach the peak of yuanying. With a flick of his sleeve, he grabbed the sword Xiu's waist and placed him firmly on the ground. "Meng Qi." He didn't forget to call out to Meng Qi. "Come and see." Not only Meng Qi, even Xiao Ran followed. "It's my Shi Xiao," Xiao Ran said. Its third Shi was first disciple. His sword. Xiao Ran looked at the 2 pieces of broken sword on the ground. The sword was still stained with fresh blood. He didn't know if it was his master's blood or the enemy's. Li Che laid down Xiao Ran's Shi Xiao, the sword Xiu from Broken Space Sect, and pressed his fingers on his forehead. A strand of Ling energy was sent out from his fingertip and entered that person's body. Li Che suddenly exclaimed softly. He opened his eyes and looked at Meng Qi. "It's so strange," he said, his spiritual sea. "Meng Qi, come and take a look." "Yeah." He looked at Meng Qi stretch out his hand and gently cut open the wound of the sword Xiu from Broken Space Sect. There was a dark golden light flickering in the blood. 10,000 zombie silkworm. Li Che exclaimed. "It's the 10,000 zombie silkworm again. This isn't right." Meng Qi had already skillfully soaked his hand in the medicine and pulled out the silk of the 10,000 zombie silkworm. He skillfully extracted the silk from the body of the 10,000 zombie silkworm. After a while, Meng Qi put away the cocoon and asked, "What's wrong with him?" "His spiritual sea is in a mess." Li Che retracted his gaze from the wound and said, "The Ling energy is like a storm rampaging in his spiritual sea." He tilted his head slightly and frowned slightly. "It's like he's not cultivating properly and has gone berserk." Meng Qi nodded and pressed her fingers on that person's forehead. "Oh." She retracted her hand and pressed her left hand lightly on the fingertips of her right hand. "How is it?" Li Che asked. "No, he's gone berserk." Meng Qi took a deep breath. "He's been poisoned." Her tone was firm. She stretched out her hand to help that Broken Space Sect disciple up and gently lifted his eyelids. Facing the sunlight, that Broken Space Sect disciple's blood-red eyes were dazed. However, under the blood-red eyes, several dark green threads could be seen. As expected, Li Che's expression became serious. He took out a silver needle that he often used and gently inserted it into that disciple's eyes. This is... He withdrew the silver needle and lowered his head slightly. It's goo poison. The disciples of Southern Border's medical cultivator sects were more familiar with goo poison. After all, there was the largest forest and swamp in the 3,000 worlds. There were poisonous insects and flowers everywhere. There were also sects that specialized in rearing poisonous insects. Liche brought the silver needle closer and sniffed it lightly. He was a little uncertain. It smells like the decaying smell of fallen leaves piled up for hundreds of years. This is... He frowned and looked at that broken space sect disciple's eyes. There are green threads in his eyes, his spirit see. Liche finished speaking and pressed his fingers on that person's forehead. Sure enough, that person's spirit see became quiet again. It was as if the chaotic spirit chi storm earlier had never existed. Other than being unconscious, that broken space sect disciple's spirit see was as calm as a lake. There were no signs of injuries at all. He suddenly frowned and exchanged glances with Meng Qi, who was looking up at him. Withering glory goo. The two of them blurted out at the same time. What is withering glory goo? Xiao Ran held his sword and stood behind Meng Qi. He glanced at that unconscious broken space sect disciple indifferently, but the corner of his eyes was vigilantly looking at the surroundings. Because of their master, their branch had always been a little independent in the sect and did not have good relations with other disciples. Moreover, third senior uncle and his master Ling Ji had always been on bad terms. Their relationship with third senior uncle's disciples was also mediocre. In comparison, Xiao Ran was more concerned about Meng Qi's safety. Right now, they were hiding behind the city wall. With the city wall as their cover, plus the fact that the cultivators were already in a killing frenzy, no one noticed Meng Qi and Li Che, the two little medical cultivators, so they were relatively safe. Xiao Ran still did not dare to slack off. His life-bound sword hovered beside him. The sword tip trembled slightly, as if it could jump up and attack the enemy at any time. Withering glory goo. Li Che's voice trembled. This withering glory goo is one of the legendary 7 great poison goo. Meng Qi continued with a calm tone. It is produced in swamps filled with poisonous insects. Under the decaying leaves that have accumulated for thousands of years, in small worlds that we cannot see, the poisonous insects fight for the right to survive. The losers are devoured by the winners. The final winner has accumulated an unknown amount of poison in its body. The Poison King died in the swamps. Under the protection of the decaying leaves, his corpse did not decay for thousands of years. 100 years later, this Poison King's corpse is fished out and the poison is extracted to refine it into a goo. That is this withering glory goo. Meng Qi's tone was calm. I have only read about it in books. There are more sects now than in ancient times. It is not so easy to find a 1,000-year-old Poison King's corpse. Thus, I have never seen a person poisoned by goo. Yes, Li Che nodded heavily. In our southern border, that is, the swamps beside our Blue Sea Academy, almost every day there are disciples training in there. Most of the swamps in southern border are similar. Thus, I have only read about it in books, but have never seen withering glory goo. Then how do you know he is poisoned by withering glory goo? Xiao Ran could not help but ask. Meng Qi and Li Che raised their heads to look at him. Their clear eyes were filled with confusion. The symptoms are recorded in the books. They spoke in unison again. Meng Qi paused for a moment before explaining. Your senior brother's spirit sea is sometimes filled with spiritual energy and sometimes calm like waves. The walls of his spirit sea are extremely fragile now, as if they will crumble at a touch. There are green lines in his eyes, and his flesh is as still as ice or stone. These are all signs of withering glory goo. Xiao Ran. Then if this continues, he will become a living corpse. Meng Qi said, withering glory means that he is still alive. If his spirit sea is filled with spiritual energy, his spirit sea will be very lively and flourishing. But he will be in a coma and will not wake up. His muscles and blood vessels will be stiff, and there will only be a trace of life left. That is why it is called withering glory. Li Che continued, like he is alive, but also like he is dead. He sighed lightly before getting together with Meng Qi and discussing in a low voice. I have only read about withering glory goo in books, but there is no treatment method in the books. Yes. Meng Qi nodded. The Poison King's poison is too complex. It is too difficult to detoxify it. And now, we are in this 10 extreme mountain. Li Che looked around and said helplessly, No, we can still discuss it with the elders in the sect. I will call Dao Friend Shui. Meng Qi suddenly stood up. When alliance has been passed down since the olden antiquity era, there might be a way. Shimmy. The more Xiao Ran called her Shimmy, the smoother it became. He immediately followed. I will go with you. Meng Qi nodded. She knew that if she relied on herself, she would be injured by others before she could find Shui Chengxian in this chaotic battle. The two of them rushed towards the top of the city wall. In order to save Shui Chengxian, Meng Qi and Li Che had already retreated to the corner of the city wall. Once they passed the corner, sword lights and the light of spells flashed. Occasionally, the light of powerful talismans flashed. It looked very lively. There, Meng Qi's gaze turned and saw Shui Chengxian in a blue robe mixed in with a crowd of people. Let's go. Xiao Ran estimated and flicked his sword. He was the #1 person in the younger generation of Broken Space Sect, and could be considered one of the best among the young sword Shio in Western Kingdom. Wherever the life bond sword went, the sword light flashed. Several Xiozha had no choice but to dodge the sword light. Let's go. Meng Qi's figure flashed and passed through the gap Xiao Ran created. Her figure was lithe and her footsteps were quick. She held a handful of spirit stones in her left hand. Those red-eyed Xiozha were caught off guard by Xiao Ran's sword attack. Before they could react, Meng Qi had already easily passed through the battlefield. Fellow Shui. She quickly flew to Shui Chengshuan's side. At this time, Shui Chengxian was locked in battle with a spell Xiao. Xiao Ran landed side by side with her. He pointed his sword forward. Clang! His narrow and thin long sword turned into an afterimage and hit the spell Xiao's natal talisman 12 times. Xiao Ran's movements were too fast. The 12 sounds almost merged into one sound. When it reached Meng Qi and the others' ears, it was like a long sound. Meng Qi glanced at his natal sword and suddenly said, Fellow Xiao, the last 2 moves, huh? Xiao Ran was startled. His move was to infuse the formation into his sword moves. Normal disciples of the Broken Void sect could only learn the multi-man sword formation. Only personal disciples like him could learn the true essence of the Broken Void sect's sword arts. His 12 sword moves did not seem to be very powerful, but if the opponent's natal talisman did not flash and the last 2 sword moves were not crooked and connected into a formation, then the opponent's talisman would not be able to hold on. Is it crooked? As Meng Qi spoke, she waved the medicine knife in her right hand. If they were to really fight, she would be much weaker than Xiao Ran. Her speed and agility would be far inferior to his. However, the spell Xiao was caught off guard by Xiao Ran's attack. After his natal talisman was attacked 12 times, he was still in a daze. Meng Qi's medicine knife danced. Clang, clang, clang. She steadily hit the cultivator's natal talisman. She already had a handful of spirit stones in her left hand. With a flick of her finger, she embedded one of the spirit stones into the spot where she made the last move. The spell Xiao's natal talisman suddenly lit up. Without waiting for the other party to react, the life source magic treasure shattered into pieces on the ground. My talisman! The spell Xiao screamed and rushed towards his natal talisman. Shui Chengxian immediately flicked her silver needle and pierced it into the back of the man's neck. Ugh! The spell Xiao groaned and fell to the ground. His eyes were wide open. The spiritual energy in his spiritual ocean was still abundant and had not been used up. However, when the silver needle pierced through his body, he could not move at all. At that moment, the spell Xiao felt like crying. Who said that medical practitioners did not have the ability to fight? Xiao Ran. He was in a daze. If his 2 sword moves were accurate, the spiritual energy would be sent out along with the sword moves. The spiritual energy left behind by the 12 sword moves would form a small formation. When the formation was activated, the cultivator's talisman would also break. Because the last two sword moves were off-target, the cultivator was also a perfected nascent soul cultivator. His natal talisman would not break so easily. He did not expect Meng Qi to be able to make up for the two moves he missed so easily. However, her cultivation level was not as high as his, so she used a spirit stone to activate the formation in the end. Xiao Ran turned to look at Meng Qi. A trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. Could it be that Shirzhuan had already passed down the entire formation to her? Fellow Taoist Shui. The female cultivator in green did not know that many thoughts flashed through Xiao Ran's mind. Meng Qi stood beside Shui Chengxian. She reached out and grabbed his arm. Someone over there has been poisoned by the withered glory goo. Her tone was calm, but her eyes were exceptionally bright. Meng Qi looked at Shui Chengxian with a burning gaze. Xiao Ran felt that he could hear a trace of suppressed fanaticism from her calm tone. Withered glory. Goo. Shui Chengxian's eyes were bloodshot. He turned his head stiffly to look at Meng Qi. He blankly repeated her words. Yes. Meng Qi nodded heavily. She reached out and grabbed Shui Chengxian's left hand. She wrote on his palm, Withered Glory Goo. By Qj Novel Reading Network, she took out the Jianming incense that Li Che gave her and lit it with a flick of her hand. A slightly bitter medicinal smell spread out. Meng Qi looked at Shui Chengxian's eyes and repeated, Withered Glory Goo, one of the 7 legendary ancient poisonous goo. Shui Chengxian's eyes were still bloodshot. He raised his eyebrows slightly. His expression changed a little. Withered Glory Goo. Yes. Meng Qi nodded heavily. A sword Xiao has been poisoned by the withered glory goo. Li Che is also there. Let's go. Shui Chengxian finally opened his mouth. Let's go. Meng Qi turned around and walked with Shui Chengxian back the way they came. Hey! Xiao Ran was startled. He quickly chased after the two. Wait for me. As he spoke, his natal sword swept out and dutifully opened up a path for the two of them. They quickly returned to the corner of the city wall. It was at this time that most of the cultivators on the city wall were controlled by the Thousand Emperor Bell and had lost their minds. Otherwise, Meng Qi and the other two would not have made it back so easily. You're back. Li Che heard the voice and raised his head to look at Meng Qi. His eyes brightened. Taoist Shui. Shui Chengxian's eyes were bloodshot. He squatted down beside the broken space sex sword Xiao and pressed his finger on his forehead. Then, like Meng Qi, he quickly opened that person's eyelids. It is indeed the withered glory goo. He raised his head to look at Meng Qi and Li Che. The bloodshot color in his eyes seemed to have faded slightly. We know the origin of the withered glory goo. Meng Qi quickly said. Shui Chengxian nodded and said, I have seen records of this goo in the Goo tribe's library. He paused and said, The Poison King's body is mixed with poison. It is the most difficult part of this goo to detoxify. Every day, the withered glory goo stays in a person's body. The poison will entangle with the blood, flesh, meridians, and even the spirit qi. If this drags on for too long, even if we find a way to detoxify it, the poison will enter the organs and meridians. The person will be a cripple. So that's it. Meng Qi and Li Che nodded together. There are some poisons in the 3,000 worlds that cannot be detoxified. She thought and said, We can think of a way to detoxify it. Meng Qi's eyes brightened. He took out a small jade box from his storage bag. There were several cocoons made from 10,000 zombie silkworms' silk in the box. The dark golden silk shone with a strange light under the sunlight. 10,000 zombie silkworms' silk is impervious to fire and water. Other than being used to make bracelets, it can also be used to make bracelets, detoxifying it. Li Che continued. We could try. Shui Chengxian said. If we don't detoxify you, how can we have 10,000 zombie silkworm silk? He asked casually. Li Che and I have treated several injured people. We extracted it from their bodies. Meng Qi said. Shui Chengxian frowned slightly. 10,000 zombie silkworm silk was also obtained here. He suddenly thought of something and raised his head to look into the distance. There, under the sky, there were endless green mountains. Time seemed to have stopped in the middle of these high mountains. What's wrong? Meng Qi asked. 10,000 zombie silkworm silk is not as rare as withering glory goo, but it is also not something that can be found everywhere. According to what I know, 10,000 zombie silkworm can only be found in the extreme north of southern border, the place closest to the demon world. He paused and continued. It is rumored that that place is too close to the demon world. Adding on the fact that it is covered in ice and snow all day long, normal Xiozha cannot survive. Thus, there are no sects within 1,000 li. Moreover, if it leaves that place, even the strongest sect will not be able to support it. There are many choices of materials to make bracelets. 10,000 zombie silkworm silk is not very useful. Even if there are medical Xiozha who go looking for 10,000 zombie silkworm, they will not prepare so much. In this 10 extremes mountain, how can there be so many people injured by 10,000 zombie silkworm silk? Shui Changxian said slowly. The blood-red color in his eyes gradually intensified. There's also withering glory goo. What a coincidence! Treating withering glory goo might also use 10,000 zombie silkworm silk. Shui Changxian stood up. His eyes were so red that it seemed like blood would drip out. He gritted his teeth and said slowly, "There must be some scheme in this. We can't save this person." Chapter 164. Fellow Taoist Shui. Meng Qi stood up. Fellow Taoist Shui. Li Che also stood up. "You can't save him, you can't." Shui Changxian repeated these words in a low voice, his eyes becoming redder and redder. Meng Qi and Li Che looked at each other and saw a trace of surprise in each other's eyes. "Eastern Emperor Bell?" Li Che murmured. "Eastern Emperor Bell." Even Xiao Ran, who was standing to the side, looked at Shui Changxian in surprise. This young medical practitioner from the Wind League was basically already decided to be the future leader of the Wind League. He was the strongest medical practitioner among the younger generation in the Western Kingdom, and also one of the most outstanding people among the younger generation in the Western Kingdom. In Meng Qi's impression, he had always been elegant and graceful, with the calmness of someone from a large sect. But at this moment, Shui Changxian straightened his back, the hands hanging by his side clenched into fists, and his entire body was lightly trembling. His eyes were even redder than before. The color of blood completely covered his eyes. Meng Qi couldn't see his pupils at all. She slightly raised her head. Shui Qingxuan's expression looked as if he was going through some kind of extremely painful torture. The veins on his forehead bulged, his face was pale, and the tip of his nose was soaked with fine beads of sweat. You can't save him." He seemed to be muttering to himself, but more like he was saying it to himself. He kept repeating the same words. "You can't save him, 1,000 Emperor Bell?" Li Che asked uncertainly. 1,000 Emperor Bell. Xiao Ran looked at Shui Changxian in surprise, clearly also very surprised. The two of them were almost unaffected by the sound of the 1,000 Emperor Bell, and they both knew Shui Changxian. At this moment, the two of them stared blankly at this young practitioner that they didn't seem to know at all, their eyes full of surprise. 1,000 Emperor's Bell. Meng Qi raised his head slightly and recalled the conversation between Ling Ji and Yun Qingyan. The masterpiece of an ancient blacksmith would awaken the unwillingness and desire in one's heart, making one unable to control themselves. Of course, she trusted Yun Qingyan, but she still felt that something was amiss. When I heard the bell, my heart was indeed filled with killing intent. Meng Qi tilted his head slightly and said, "However, that killing intent soon faded away." She frowned slightly. Later on, when I met Li Che, the last bit of hostility dissipated. No matter how much the 1,000 Emperor's Bell rings, it won't affect me. Meng Qi said, "If it's really a magic weapon left by an ancient refining master, with my cultivation, it shouldn't be so easy to dissolve it." "What's wrong?" Xiao Ran asked. "You said that you didn't hear the bell at all?" Meng Qi turned to look at him. His black and white eyes were calm and clear. "Yes," Xiao Ran nodded. "When we went to the opposite side, we really didn't hear the bell at all. Just now, Senior Ling Ji, Meng Qi raised his hand and pointed in the direction where Ling Ji left. He went that way. She said, "That's the direction you came from. If the Thousand Emperors Bell really exists, you should be the first to be affected by it." "That's right." Xiao Ren also saw his master's elegant posture when he was on his way here. "You mean this isn't the Thousand Emperors Bell?" Li Che looked up at the sky, countless thoughts flashing through his mind. He had never seen the Thousand Emperors Bell, and even blacksmiths didn't know much about it. This kind of magic weapon that existed in ancient legends was not as intimidating to him as it was to Xiao Ran, who came from a big sect and heard a lot of ancient legends. "If it's not the Thousand Emperors Bell," Li Che murmured and repeated, turning to look at Meng Qi. The green-clothed woman stood tall, her eyes flashing slightly, her slender fingers moving lightly on her own robe, obviously deep in thought. "Messing with people's minds. It will arouse people's killing intent. It will make people like Xue Qingxian, the elegant young master of a family, become suspicious." Meng Qi's fingers moved faster and faster, and suddenly a name flashed through her mind. She suddenly turned her head and looked at Li Che. Coincidentally, he also turned his head to look at her. His eyes also became clear, falling heartwood. After leaving the Starfall Sea, Meng Qi and Li Che mentioned the falling heartwood. The leaves of the falling heartwood could cause illusions, causing people to fall into an illusion without knowing it, and even unable to distinguish between reality and illusion. Those powerful people in ancient times could also use the leaves of the falling heartwood and other spiritual herbs to create even more powerful illusions. This was the small 10 Extremes Mountain. Although it was only a part of the 10 Extremes Mountain, it had indeed been passed down from ancient times and had not fallen for tens of thousands of years. It was very normal for there to be an illusion of the falling heartwood here. Li Che obviously thought of the same thing as her. His expression also became serious. Meng Qi lowered her head and looked at the ground. The disciples of the Broken Void sect were still lying unconscious on the ground. In front of them, Xue Qingxuan's eyes were bright red, and his mouth was muttering something. She turned her head and looked below the city wall. Across the sword light and the light of the spell, Yin Qingyin, who was wearing a white robe, stood tall, and she seemed to be able to see the faint smile on his face. Which of these were real, and which of them were fake? Meng Qi's hand suddenly trembled slightly. She recalled Lin Yin, who had been in the Starfall Sea. She had only retained less than 10% of her strength, yet she had still been so powerful that she had defeated Pei Mufeng and the other powerful figures of the younger generation in the Millennium World with a snap of her fingers. The people they met in the small 10 Extremes Mountain were probably even stronger than that Lin Yin. Even this little girl is starting to be afraid. Hee hee. At this moment, in the 10 Extremes Mountain, at the peak of a very tall mountain, a man who was sitting cross-legged on the edge of a cliff suddenly chuckled. His appearance clearly looked very young, but his pair of eyes seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life, hiding unspeakable vicissitudes of life. He sat lazily on the edge of the cliff, his hair casually tied behind his head. The mountain wind whistled past, lifting up his sleeves and hair, making him look like he was swaying, as if he would be blown off the cliff in the next moment. But no matter how the mountain wind blew, he still sat steadily on the giant rock on the edge of the cliff, as steady as a rock. Beside the man, a small sword that was only about the length of a finger quickly circled around him, like a shooting star. "You're going to lose, oh." He turned his head to look behind him, his mood clearly very happy. Even his voice was tinged with a smile. "That's not certain." Behind him, there was a cultivator wearing a green robe. The green-robed cultivator also looked very young, but his hair was pure white. His white hair was coiled up with a simple bamboo hairpin, revealing his slender neck. Beside the green-robed cultivator, there was a small, black three-legged cauldron floating. The body of the cauldron was simple and unadorned. Only a few simple patterns were casually carved on it. The entire small cauldron looked very unremarkable, spinning around the man. The green-robed, white-haired man with the small cauldron smiled freely. Since he inherited the Gu Wu Ling cauldron and obtained the medical manual left behind by Gu Xiaoyan, there must be something different. His tone was certain. Moreover, You all saw her performance in the apricot forest with your own eyes. Gu Xiaoyin chose her to be her successor. I believe in her vision. Oh, is that so? Then I'll wipe my eyes and wait. You can wipe your eyes and wait. What's with the noise? Not far from the two, there was a young woman in red standing. Until the end, no one knows what will happen. No one has climbed up the 10 Extremes mountain for hundreds of years. If this continues, the 10 Extremes mountain will collapse. That year, he spent so much effort to set it up, 10,000 years of effort will be destroyed in a day. I want to see if you all have the face to see him. If the 10 Extremes mountain collapses, we will definitely be destroyed, completely annihilated from this world. Anyway, we won't be able to see him anymore. The white-robed man who spoke first said with a mischievous smile, I will die by myself. Who cares about the flood behind me? When the red-clothed female cultivator heard the words, we won't be able to see him anymore. A complicated light flashed through her eyes. She snorted lightly and stopped talking to the white-robed man. Don't mind him. Instead, the green-robed cultivator walked to her side and comforted her in a low voice. He has always been like this. I know. The red-clothed female pursed her lips and nodded. She lifted a strand of hair by her cheek and carelessly tucked it behind her ear. A trace of sadness flashed through her eyes as she stared into the distance. But he was right. It has already been 10,000 years. How much longer can we wait? At the same time, behind the city wall on the mountain peak. What's wrong with the falling heartwood? Xiao Ran asked. What are you guys talking about? Meng Qi and Li Che looked at each other and said, It's not just the falling heartwood. She paused and lowered her head to look at the broken space sect disciple lying on the ground. The green lines in his eyes were still there, and the Ling energy in his body spirit sea had started a new wave of madness. Yes. Li Che also squatted down and said in a deep voice, This person is indeed poisoned by the withering glory goo, but the falling heartwood, he muttered and was actually at a loss for a moment. Why did he feel that the current situation was becoming more and more complicated? What exactly did they encounter? Meng Qi also looked at the broken space sect disciple in a daze and then looked at Shui Chengxian. The future leader of the Wind Alliance was still standing there. His eyes were crimson red and his hands were clenched into fists. He was still muttering things like, Don't save him, don't believe him, but he did not take any further action. Save him first. Meng Qi said decisively. She took out the small jade box again and took out the dark golden cocoon. The silk of the 10,000 zombie silkworm was extremely thin, but also extremely tough. It cannot be cut by blades and could not be damaged by fire or water. No matter what, we have to detoxify him first. Meng Qi said. She waved her hand, and the 5-spirit cauldron landed beside her. As she spoke, she threw several spirit herbs into the 5-spirit cauldron. Her delicate hands clasped, and the formation inside the 5-spirit cauldron lit up. The spirit herbs were mixed into a ball. All right. Li Che nodded and calmed down. He took the cocoon from Meng Qi's hand. I'll do it. He paused for a moment before explaining, My cultivation is higher than yours, so you'll have to protect me. Yes. Meng Qi nodded. She turned around and looked at the group of cultivators who were still fighting. She raised her hand and took out her medicine knife. Meng Qi stood up and held the medicine knife horizontally. Her arm swayed a few times. The green silhouette suddenly moved and quickly circled around Li Che and the broken space sect disciple. In just a moment, Meng Qi had already returned to Xiao Ran's side. She lifted her foot and stepped on the formation she just drew. She flicked her finger, and a few spirit stones flew towards the formation. This was not the first time Xiao Ran saw Meng Qi's formation. He only saw a blur in front of his eyes, and then the formation lit up. Their broken space sect was probably one of the sects that were most familiar with formations and understood them the most in the 3,000 generations world. Even so, he did not recognize the formation that Meng Qi drew so casually. The intricate lines, the beautiful structure, the decisiveness and swiftness of the work. Xiao Ran did not know much about medical cultivation, but in his eyes, Meng Qi's talent in formations was indeed shocking. He slowly exhaled. He had heard that this junior apprentice Sister Meng came from an unknown small sect. Where did she learn such shocking skills from? Inside the formation, Li Che had already soaked the silk of the 10,000 zombie silkworm in the medicinal liquid that Meng Qi made from the five-spirit cauldron. Then he carefully took out his medicine knife and cut a few wounds on the broken space sect disciple's body. His expression was serious. He held the silk of the 10,000 zombie silkworm with one hand and sent it into the broken space sect disciple's body with the other. The silk of the 10,000 zombie silkworm seemed to be alive. When it touched the flesh, it silently drilled into the flesh like the most agile fish. Without any hesitation, Li Che cut 2 wounds on his palms with a knife. He took out a small medicine bottle from his storage bag and sprinkled some medicinal powder on the wounds on his palm. Xiao Ran was confused and could not help but exclaim, "This is the snow melting powder." Meng Qi casually explained, "It can prevent the bleeding from the wound from clotting." She paused for a moment and said, "This way, the silk of the 10,000 zombie silkworm will not drill into your senior martial brother's body and cannot be removed." "I see." Xiao Ran nodded. He saw that Meng Qi's face was calm as she spoke, as if this was nothing out of the ordinary. He was a sword cultivator and only cultivated the Tao of killing. The sword of a sword cultivator would only be stained with the blood of others. He never thought that the medicine knife of a medical cultivator would sometimes be pointed at himself. "Do you guys do this often?" Xiao Ran could not help but ask. "What?" Meng Qi had already turned her head to look at the battle. She turned her head and looked at Li Che, who was still treating the broken space sect disciple. She suddenly made a decision. "I'll go over and take a look," Meng Qi said as she took out 2 magic treasures from her storage bag. Before she entered Shao Shi Ju Mountain, she went to the sky beyond heaven to buy many magic treasures. Now, she was wearing one on her wrist and the other on her chest. Meng Qi took out 2 spirit stones and inserted them into the 2 magic treasures. The magic treasures flashed, and 2 different colored light barriers appeared, enveloping her inside. Meng Qi's body flashed. Relying on the protection of the magic treasures, she rushed towards the place where the battle was the fiercest. Junior Marshall's sister, wait for me." Xiao Ran's mission was to protect Meng Qi. He did not hesitate and chased after her. His natal sword suddenly rushed in front of Meng Qi. The tip of the sword flashed coldly and firmly protected her. Xiao Ran jumped a few steps to Meng Qi's side. Just as he was about to speak, she stuffed 2 magic treasures and a few spirit stones into his hands. "Wear it." Meng Qi gestured to him. Xiao Ran was startled. He looked at the magic treasures in his hands and was suddenly shocked. 7th rank magic treasures? He was a disciple of the Broken Void sect. The Broken Void sect was considered the #1 sword cultivation sect in the Western Kingdom. Disciples of large sects like his were mostly wealthy. However, in the 3,000 generations world, weapon cultivators have been in decline for a long time. Even if his sect had a deep foundation, it was not easy for him to casually take out a 7th rank magic treasure and give it to someone. Beside the magic treasures, Meng Qi even thoughtfully placed a few spirit stones. In the 3,000 generations world, magic treasures and weapons could be controlled by cultivators using their spiritual energy. For natal magic treasures and weapons, cultivators were naturally more willing to use their spiritual energy to control them. This way, no matter if it was a magic treasure or a weapon, it would be more flexible and convenient to use. However, for other magic treasures, it would be better to use spirit stones. This would prevent cultivators from having to split their attention or use a strand of their spiritual energy. Xiao Ran was just about to say that he had spirit stones when his gaze suddenly moved and he was shocked. Shin spirit stones. He had never felt that he did not have money before. After all, he came from a large sect with a long history like the Broken Void sect. He was also one of the most outstanding among the younger generation of disciples in the sect. Xiao Ran had never troubled himself over spirit stones. In the sect, everything he needed was provided by the sect. Completing sect missions would also give him spirit stones as a reward. Even so, when he saw the Xian spirit stones, he could not help but be shocked. This Meng Shimmy, if she wanted spirit stones, she had spirit stones. If she wanted talismans, she had talismans. Her talent in formations and medical cultivation was so outstanding. If a Shirzun wanted to please her, it would probably not be easy, right? As Qiao Ran thought. He put on the 2 talismans just like Meng Qi. The same faint light rippled out and enveloped him. The faintly discernible Ling energy swam around his body and protected him. Shimmy was really generous. Qiao Ran caught up to Meng Qi and said, "Many thanks, Shimmy." Meng Qi was startled and seemed to be too lazy to correct Qiao Ran's increasingly natural way of addressing her. She jumped up the city wall in a few steps and quickly walked toward the Xiozha who was lying on the city wall. Meng Qi lowered her head and quickly checked that person's body. "He's one of us." Qiao Ran looked at that person and was a little unfamiliar. "One of us?" "Yes." Meng Qi nodded. "He's a medical Xiao." As she spoke, she bent down to carry that male Xiao who was even taller than her. "Let me do it." Qiao Ran quickly rushed forward and helped her to lift that unfamiliar medical Xiao. "Let's go to the bottom of the city wall first." Meng Qi thanked him and asked him to carry that person down the city wall. Li Che was still dispelling the poison from the broken void sect disciple. Meng Qi quickly checked that medical Xiao and exhaled. "His injuries are not serious. He's probably fainted because he was hit by a spell and his Ling energy was depleted." As she spoke, she stuffed 2 pills into that medical Xiao's mouth and then supported that medical Xiao to lean against the city wall. After that, she stood up and jumped up the city wall again. Qiao Ran silently followed her and asked casually, "Shimmy, what are you planning to do? I don't know whether the 1,000 Emperor's Bell and Falling Heartwood are real or fake." Meng Qi said faintly, "I can't just stand there and not move. So I'll do what Li Che did and do what I can first." "What I can do?" Qiao Ran turned around and looked at Li Che, who was concentrating on dispelling the poison from his Shixiao. When he turned around again, the green slender figure had already blended into the crowd. "Junior Marshall's sister." He hurriedly called out to her and followed her. When Meng Qi and Qiao Ran brought the 3rd injured Xiozha back to the bottom of the city wall, that medical Xiao had already woken up. He was only depleted of his Ling energy and his injuries were not serious. When he opened his eyes, he saw Jian Meng Qi bandaging the wounds of another Xiozha beside him. "Thank you," the medical Xiao said as he struggled to stand up. Qiao Ran hurriedly went forward to help him. "Be careful." "Thank you." The medical Xiao nodded and thanked him. Then he walked to Meng Qi's side. Only then did Qiao Ran notice that the blood in this unfamiliar medical Xiao's eyes had become very faint, revealing a pair of clear eyes. "Let me help you." As he spoke, he half knelt beside the injured Xiozha. With a wave of his hand, a small cauldron appeared beside him. Qiao Ran. Meng Qi softly replied with a and did not say anything. The 2 of them gathered together in silence. Their 4 hands were busy on the injured Xiozha's body. Meng Qi's 5-spirit cauldron and the medical Xiao's life cauldron quickly emitted a faint, bitter medicinal fragrance. As the 2 of them were busy, Li Che also stood up and walked over. "Brother Chun." He cupped his hands towards the medical Xiao. Without any greetings, he quickly joined the rescue team. This person's heart meridian was almost completely cut into pieces. What a domineering sword chi. Qiao Ran stood aside and silently watched the scene in front of him. He remembered that when he first found Meng Qi, she and Qiao Ran looked at him with their eyes wide open. Their gazes were focused, curious, and pure. Qiao Ran was a little unsure of how to describe it. He watched the 3 of them busy themselves. One of them was clearly in a killing frenzy on the battlefield just a moment ago and was just saved by Meng Qi. But now, he was already wholeheartedly saving people. Did he ever think that the person he saved now might be the person who attacked him in the chaos just now? He couldn't help but scratch his head. He turned to look at the chaotic battlefield in the distance. It seemed like there were 2 completely different worlds in front of him and behind him. On one side, the wind was clear and the moon was clear. On the other side, there was a rain of blood. It was real and cruel. In any case, he didn't really understand these people. Xiao Ran's natal sword seemed to understand his master's thoughts. It floated around him, and the tip of the sword swayed. It seemed like the natal sword was also thinking seriously. It was so engrossed in its thoughts that its little head was nodding bit by bit. His gaze faintly looked at his Xixiang, who was still unconscious. He didn't want to ask Meng Qi if the poison in his body was cured. Let's leave it at that for now. Xiao Ran pondered for a moment. He would just do what he could to the best of his ability. With the addition of one more person, Li Chei's hands were free again. In just a short while, the wounds of the heavily injured cultivator were treated. This is for you. Meng Qi took out 4 talismans from his storage brocade pouch. He handed one each to Li Chei and the unfamiliar medical Xiao. 7th grade talismans. Xiao Ran looked at the 2 happily. He experienced his own shock just now. Xian's spirit stone. Soon, a second exclamation sounded. Meng Qi. Li Chei looked at Meng Qi and gave her a thumbs up. You are really getting richer. Meng Qi smiled and said, I, Xiao Ran, will continue to look for the injured Xiao. Li Chei, you, in this person? Chun Yu. The medical Xiao quickly said. Shun Daoist, continue to guard here. Meng Qi said. Okay. Li Chei nodded. Be careful, Meng Qi. Meng Qi nodded and turned to call Xiao Ran. Let's go. Shimmy. Xiao Ran obediently followed. You don't know that guy, right? Aren't you afraid that he won't return you the 7th grade talisman? Meng Qi was slightly startled. He is already a spirit-severing stage Xiao. His cultivation is higher than Li Chei's. The 7th grade talisman will be useless to him soon. Why won't he return it to me? Shimmy, Xiao Ran said earnestly. It's not like that. He said, look, there aren't many 7th grade talismans now. Not many? Meng Qi said, there are many in Heavenly Sea Pavilion. They said that they are very good at making 7th grade talismans now. It's a pity that there are too few 8th grade talismans and the materials are hard to come by. However, there are already many 7th grade talismans in Heavenly Sea Pavilion shops. In Heavenly Sea Pavilion. In Heavenly Sea Pavilion. She thought for a moment and added, the price is also quite reasonable. Xiao Ran turned and stared at her for a moment. Do you still have many 7th grade talismans like this? I still have dozens of 7th grade defensive talismans. Meng Qi showed her storage bag. There are also many offensive talismans. Xiao Ran was speechless. 8th grade talismans are harder to come by. Meng Qi said, Heavenly Sea Pavilion can only make very few talismans. They are unwilling to sell high-quality talismans. I only have a few. Xiao Ran was speechless. He suddenly remembered that the first time he was ordered to find Meng Qi, his master had called him to his bamboo hut and told him some things related to this little shimmy. Xiao Ran had a deep impression that his master had said that not long after his shimmy was born, she disappeared without a trace. Not long ago, he found out that his junior martial sister was actually picked up by someone from a small, poor, and broken town. When she grew up, she joined a small sect near the town. 2K novels. That sect, in his master's words, was even more broken and weak. It was so weak that any young disciple from the Broken Void sect could crush it with a single finger. Moreover, it was said that the sect called Cool Breeze Valley did not have much wealth. Even in the eastern border, which was not as good as the western border, it was only a small and unknown sect. His master had also said that the entire sect probably could not even take out 10 Shin Spirit Stones. As for talismans, treasures, and ancient inheritances, it was even more impossible for them to have it. Therefore, his shimmy must have suffered a lot since she was young. It was his fault for not being able to give his shimmy a better life. Even now, Xiao Ran could still remember that when his Shizun said those words, his eyes were slightly red and his tone was filled with regret. Even he was filled with sympathy for this shimmy that he had never met before. Therefore, when Xiao Ran was ordered to leave Broken Void City by his master, he specially went to the sect's treasury and used the points he obtained from the sect's mission to exchange for a small and exquisite defensive talisman as a gift for his shimmy. That talisman was very exquisite and was made into the shape of a jade pendant. Many female disciples liked it very much. Moreover, he felt that a Tier 5 talisman would definitely be enough for a shimmy to use. That talisman was still lying in Xiao Ran's storage bag, and he did not have the time to give it away. Now, Xiao Ran could not help but look at the Tier 7 defensive bracelet on his wrist. On the bracelet, the Shin Spirit Stone was shining brightly. Shimmy was much more generous than him. Shimmy's wealth also seemed to be much richer than his master's. Master wanted to curry favor with Shimmy. Really, the road ahead was long and arduous. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Meng Qi's voice called Xiao Ran back to his senses. I'm here. He quickly landed beside the green-clothed female cultivator and took over the cultivator she was supporting. She's lost too much blood. As Meng Qi spoke, a silver needle in her hand fell down. Spiritual qi entered the female cultivator's body and pierced along the major acupoints on her arm. I'll stop her bleeding first, she said as she stuffed a pill into the female cultivator's mouth. Meng Qi's movements were extremely fast. Her left hand did not stop, and several stalks of spiritual herbs had already fallen into her 5-spirit cauldron. Behind her, the sound of swords clashing and the sound of spells attacking could be heard incessantly. Her expression was incomparably focused and indifferent, as if she was not disturbed by those sounds at all. The spiritual herbs in the 5-spirit cauldron finally turned into a ball of green ointment. Meng Qi stuck it on the female cultivator's wound. The blood in the wound seemed to have seen something that made it full of awe, and all of it shrank back at once. Let's go, Meng Qi said as she turned around and rushed in the direction of Li Che and the others. This time, she did not let Xiao Ran carry the female cultivator. Instead, she carried the female cultivator herself. After a few ups and downs, they returned to the corner of the city wall. Xiao Ran silently followed. In front of him, Meng Qi's green robe fluttered in the wind. Although she had a slim figure, she was already a Yuanying cultivator. Her movements were very agile when carrying a person. This person, when they reached the city wall, Li Che and Xiao Chan, you quickly surrounded them. The wound is so deep. It's just an external injury. A cultivator shouldn't bleed like this. Meng Qi, this is... Li Che stretched out his finger and gently touched the ointment Meng Qi stuck on the female cultivator's wound. This is Earth Spirit ointment. As he spoke, he raised his head and looked at Meng Qi in surprise. This can't even stop the bleeding. Even Earth Spirit ointment can't stop the bleeding. Chinyu took out a silver needle and gently touched the ointment on the female cultivator's wound. Earth Spirit ointment is already a very good medicine for stopping bleeding and treating external injuries. If it can't stop the bleeding, it can't be caused by an ordinary weapon, right? As he spoke, he took back the silver needle and sniffed it. He was a little surprised. Smell it. Li Che leaned over and sniffed it. This, he said, it smells so sweet. This isn't the smell of Earth Spirit ointment. This is the smell of this fellow Taoist blood. It's devil qi, Chinyu said. The thing that injured her must be a magic weapon or weapon refined by the devil realm. That's why it would leave such a smell. Are you sure it's devil qi? As far as I know, there are at least 7 types of poisonous herbs, 13 types of poisonous flowers, and 4 types of poisonous insects that can leave such a sweet smell in the blood. But of your 7 types of poisonous herbs, 13 types of poisonous flowers, and 4 types of poisonous insects, only 3 of them can cause a person to bleed nonstop. Moreover, these 3 types of Earth Spirit ointment shouldn't be unable to stop the bleeding. I took this from her wound, Meng Qi said as he lifted his hand. A small piece of black, extremely inconspicuous iron lay in his palm. The iron was very heavy. Although it was only a small piece, it was still heavy in his palm. Magic martial arts fragment. Li Che shouted. It really is MCMAU. There are MCMAU cultivators among them. Li Che couldn't believe it. How did they get in? First, save her, Meng Qi said decisively. If it's MCMAU, they need to use the mind-clearing technique to get rid of the devil qi in her body. I'm rank 5, Li Che said. We're both rank 5 and about to achieve great perfection. Chinyu said, "Let me do it then." Rank 6. Meng-Chi reached out and pressed the female cultivator's forehead. "Give her a mind-clearing pill." "Okay." Li Che followed his words and stuffed a mind-clearing pill into the female cultivator's mouth. "Wait." Chinyu seemed to have just reacted. She has rank 6 mind-clearing technique." "Yes." Li Che nodded. Chinyu stared at Meng-Chi in a daze for a long time. Suddenly, he muttered, "She's only a nascent soul, right? How is it possible?" Li Che glanced at him and said, "Let's save her first." As he spoke, he had already begun to throw medicine into his natal cauldron. Chinyu's gaze moved away from Meng-Chi and looked at Li Che. Then, he looked at Xiao Ran, who was standing at the side. "Let's go find a new victim." He had already guessed Meng-Chi's intention. Seeing that he couldn't be used now, he stood up and said to Xiao Ran, "No." Xiao Ran flatly refused. "Huh? My task is to protect Junior Sister." He raised his chin at Meng-Chi and said, "I can't leave her side." Chunyu, he felt that he was a little confused. A nascent soul medical cultivator actually knew rank 6 mind-clearing technique. Even if Xiao Ran didn't know him, he still knew Xiao Ran. But wasn't this person the genius sword cultivator from the Broken Void sect? Why did he call Meng-Chi, a medical cultivator, his junior sister? And Meng-Chi... Chunyu looked thoughtfully at Meng-Chi, who was kneeling beside the female cultivator. He knew who Meng-Chi was. She was said to have come from a small sect that he had never heard of before. However, she had performed outstandingly in the Apricot Forest and had been recognized as a friend by the ancient great physician, Lin Yan. She was a little doctor who didn't belong to any sect. Chinyu didn't understand, but at least he knew that he couldn't command Xiao Ran. Fortunately, not long after, Meng-Chi retracted his hand. The demonic martial arts that could hide from the sect masters and bring into Shao Shiju Mountain were not powerful. The rank 6 mind-clearing technique quickly forced the demonic chi out of the female cultivator's body. The rest was much simpler. "Let's go." Meng-Chi stood up and nodded at Xiao Ran. "Okay." Xiao Ran followed. When the two figures disappeared around the corner of the city wall, Chanyu carefully asked, "Why did fellow Taoist Xiao Ran of the Broken Void sect call fellow Taoist Meng-Chi Junior Sister?" "I don't know." Li Che was stunned for a moment and asked back, "Did he call Meng-Chi Junior Sister?" As he spoke, he raised his head and looked around. He muttered, "If we continue fighting like this, we won't stop until everyone is injured to the point that they can't fight anymore, right?" At this moment, Li Che suddenly heard a woman's cry of surprise from behind him. "Li Che!" He hurriedly turned his head and saw 2 people running towards him side by side. The woman in red on the left had big and bright eyes. She was tall and slender, and her appearance could be said to be stunning. The young man in black beside her was also incomparably handsome, but at this moment, his face was gloomy. He asked, "What's going on?" "Li Che, it really is you." The woman in red was Si Kongxing. She rushed to Li Che's side in a few steps and looked around with her big eyes. "What are you guys doing?" She didn't wait for Li Che to answer and hurriedly said, "Have you seen Meng-Chi? What's the situation now?" Still, before Li Che could answer, Si Kongxing had already stretched her neck and looked around. "On the way here, I think I heard Meng-Chi's voice." "Oh." Li Che knew Si Kongxing and Chu Tianfeng, who was beside her. He quickly and briefly explained what happened earlier. "Meng-Chi and fellow Taoist Xiao want to save people. I'll wait here with fellow Taoist Chinyu. We'll go too." Si Kongxing cheered and turned to call Chu Tianfeng. "Let's go. Let's go find Meng-Chi." Chapter 165. Meng-Chi. Si Kongxing's voice could be heard even before she arrived. Meng-Chi turned around and saw the young girl in red like a swallow returning to the forest. She made a turn in the air and landed lightly beside her. "Meng-Chi-Chi." Si Kongxing gave her a big hug. "I finally found you." "Xing-Xing." Meng-Chi patted her back and looked at Chu Tianfeng beside her. "You guys," without waiting for her to finish, Si Kongxing had already started to explain. When the war started, we were sent to the city. They thought Chu Tianfeng and I were your friends, so they told us to retreat to the innermost part of the city to guard the mayor's mansion. Yes, Si Kongxing followed behind her. As she shuttled through the battlefield, she continued, Chu Tianfeng and I wanted to try and see if we could destroy the magic array around the mayor's mansion. It said that the magic array is very powerful. Once it's activated, wind, rain, thunder, lightning, and sword chi will appear. At this point, Si Kongxing's expression fell. But we tried several methods, but we couldn't do anything to it. Meng Qi smiled at Si Kongxing. If it could be destroyed, they probably wouldn't have sent you to guard the mayor's mansion. Sigh. Si Kongxing sighed deeply. That's right. She continued, some of the people who stayed in the inner city were transferred to the city wall. But there was still no one to command Chu Tianfeng and I. We waited for a while, seeing that no one cared about us, and the noise here was getting louder and louder. We came to find them. As Si Kongxing spoke, he raised his eyes and looked around. He was somewhat at a loss. Meng Qiqi, what exactly happened here? She asked, why do I feel like they're in a mess? She paused for a moment before continuing. We bumped into Li Che just now. He roughly explained the situation here and even said that he was saving people with you. I was thinking how messy it could be, but this is really a mess. Meng Qi smiled. Meng Qi. Si Kongxing remembered and said, by the way, Li Che also said that we didn't hear the sound of the Thousand Emperors bell at all. She turned to look at Chu Tianfeng. Isn't that right? Yes. Chu Tianfeng nodded. His deep gaze fell on Meng Qi's face. After a while, he said, we didn't hear anything. Let's not talk about this. Meng Qi said, we don't know what's going on right now. Since you're here, let's help. Okay. Si Kongxing agreed without hesitation. We'll split into two groups. I'll go with Meng Qi. Chu Tianfeng, you go with Xiao Ran. No. Xiao Ran flatly refused again. I have to go with Shimmy. Meng Qi, Chu Tianfeng, okay. Si Kongxing didn't insist. Then, the four of us will go together. With the help of Si Kongxing and Chu Tianfeng, Meng Qi and the others moved faster and faster. After a while, they sent the two injured cultivators back to the city wall. Li Che, Chen Yu, Meng Qi, the three medical cultivators, and Si Kongxing helped. They moved faster and faster and became more familiar with the situation. Occasionally, Meng Qi, Li Che, and the others would argue about how the cultivators were injured and how to treat them. Most of the time, they were very harmonious. Xiaoshu Ting Appa's more and more medical cultivators were treated. These medical cultivators soon joined Meng Qi's team. In addition, some of the less seriously injured cultivators and sword cultivators also began to help them treat the injured after they recovered. In less than 2 hours, Meng Qi's team had 17 or 18 people. Among them, there were 5 medical cultivators. Phew! Li Che finished treating a sword cultivator's wound and stood up to move his body. He looked around and saw Meng Qi was treating someone. Meng Qi. Li Che saw the stone in Meng Qi's hand that was shining with starlight and went over curiously. This is Stardust Stone, Meng Qi said casually. The Stardust Stone in her hand was very small, about the size of a pigeon's egg. On the dark blue stone, specks of starlight twinkled, making it look like the night sky. However, as soon as she said the word Stardust Stone, several curious and passionate gazes shot over. Stardust Stone. A spell cultivator also came over and curiously looked at Meng Qi's hand. She was currently placing the stone on the chest of an injured Xiozha. Silver medicinal energy revolved around the Stardust Stone. Then, along with the specks of starlight on the Stardust Stone, it completely surrounded the body of the Xiozha. I heard that if you have the help of a Stardust Stone when you're cultivating, your speed will increase a lot. Is that true? That spell cultivator asked innocently. As soon as the spell cultivator said this, more passionate gazes looked over. Meng Qi didn't answer, but Li Che looked at that person. His expression changed slightly, and his eyes flashed. After these people were healed, the blood in their eyes gradually faded. After helping them treat other injured people, the blood became even lighter. However, in that spell cultivator's eyes, a new blood color spread out. It was like a tide. At first, it only appeared at the edge of the spell cultivator's eyes. Then it gradually invaded the center of his eyes. Li Che's eyes widened as he watched the color of blood slowly fill the eyes of the spell cultivator once again, occupying the most important part of his eyes. "You are," he exclaimed and reminded Meng Qi. "Meng Qi, look at him." Meng Qi turned her head and glanced at that spell cultivator. Coincidentally, the other party was also looking at her. His eyes were filled with blood, and even his gaze seemed to have become exceptionally evil. He didn't seem to be aware of it. He chuckled and said, "What's wrong with me?" As soon as he finished speaking, the sharp sound of a sword rang out in the air. A thin and narrow sword suddenly stabbed horizontally between the two people. Xiao Ran stood behind the two people and looked coldly at that spell cultivator. His eyes flashed faintly. "Stay away from my junior apprentice sister." "Ha ha!" The spell cultivator chuckled and slowly retreated. He obviously knew Xiao Ran. He even said, "Daoist Xiao, you misunderstood. I was just curious." The spell cultivator suddenly raised his voice. After all, the star... Oh, he couldn't even say the last two words of Stardust Stone, as Xiao Ran's sword had already slashed across his mouth. The spell cultivator didn't expect this broken space sect disciple to act so decisively and without hesitation. He covered his mouth and bent down in a rather pathetic state. Blood seeped out from between his fingers and dripped down. Xiao Ran's sword didn't injure him badly, but looked rather terrifying. Xikong Xing wasn't far to begin with. She immediately dashed over and stood between Meng Qi and the spell cultivator. She raised her hand, and a black wave of water soared into the sky. It wrapped around Meng Qi and herself, completely separating the spell cultivator. "White-eyed wolf!" Xikong Xing spat and reprimanded loudly. "Meng Qi just saved you. You ungrateful, white-eyed wolf." The spell cultivator was still covering his mouth. Blood was still dripping from between his fingers. It seemed that Xiao Ran's sword made him suffer. He bent his body and didn't refute Xikong Xing. He just covered his mouth like that, as if he was in so much pain that he couldn't even straighten his back. "Oomph." Xikong Xing still firmly stood in front of Meng Qi. Meng Qi was still half kneeling on the ground. He stared unblinkingly at the injured Xiuzha in front of him. The Stardust Stone flashed. The silver medicinal energy was gradually absorbed by the Xiuzha and became less and less. Her expression was focused, as if she didn't notice what was happening around her at all. "Meng Qi." Xikong Xing stared at the spell cultivator a few more times. She saw that he was still bending his body and covering his mouth. She didn't know if he was embarrassed or in pain. He didn't move for a long time. She took a step closer to Meng Qi. Her gaze also turned to her. Xiao Ran glanced indifferently at the spell cultivator. With a wave of his hand, his life-bond sword returned to his side. He recognized the spell cultivator. The other's cultivation wasn't weak. Of course, none of the Xiuzha who could enter this little 10 Extremes mountain were weak. Xiao Ran knew that his sword strike just now wasn't heavy. It was more of a warning. Maybe the other felt embarrassed. After all, Meng Qi and the others had just saved him, and now they were coveting his treasures. Also, his mouth was injured by his sword. He didn't look at the spell cultivator anymore. His gaze once again returned to Meng Qi. Be careful. Just at this time, Li Che, who was still staring at that person, suddenly shouted. Accompanying his voice was a ray of light that suddenly lit up in the spell cultivator's hand. He suddenly straightened his body. His 5 fingers spread open. The light in his hand shone brightly. A light green net of light rushed towards Meng Qi's arm. At this moment, most of the people were too far away. Xikong Xing and Xiao Ran's attention had just turned away. This was the moment when they were the most relaxed. The light green net of light was too fast. However, people could still see that the net of light was woven with thin threads that were as thin as a cow's hair. However, they flickered with a sharp light. If these thin threads touched the body of a Xiozha, even the strongest person would be cut open. Meng Qi was still half kneeling on the ground. She was completely focused on the injured person on the ground. She didn't seem to notice that such a sharp net of light was attacking her at this moment. Moreover, she was a medical practitioner. Even if she noticed it, she probably wouldn't be able to avoid it. However, at this time, with a clang, a long sword that was even faster than Xiao Ran's sword flew towards Meng Qi from behind. The light green net of light was already very fast. However, the long sword was even faster. The tip of the sword quickly and continuously tapped on the light green net of light. Every time the tip of the sword touched the light net, it would make a dull sound. It was as if the sharp sword had struck on some broken cotton wool. Xiao Ren seemed to come back to his senses. His eyes were brighter than the sword's light. 17 times, he was saying. In the blink of an eye, the sword had struck out 17 times. This wasn't the end. The moment the 17th sword struck the center of the light green net of light, the sword's body shone brightly. The sword's light gushed out, as if it had turned into the brightest star. Then, that star, with an insufferably majestic aura, slashed towards the light green net of light. With a ripping sound, the light green net was completely torn apart and split into two halves. The sword power didn't stop there. The sword's light soared into the sky and attacked the magic practitioner's natal talisman from afar. The surrounding Xiozha were all shocked by the sword. They were all the outstanding middle-aged practitioners of the younger generation of the 10 great sects of the 3,000 worlds and 4 realms. Everything they had seen and heard was extraordinary. There are also many sword cultivation sects here. However, none of the sword cultivation sect's disciples dared to stand out and say that they could fight with the owner of this long sword. Following the long scream of the magic practitioner, the natal talisman in his hand also split into two halves. With one sword strike, it easily destroyed another person's natal talisman. Moreover, it was very likely that it was the natal talisman of a practitioner of the same level. Perhaps, such a powerful sword strike only belonged to one person. Everyone's gaze turned towards the direction where the sword came from. A young man dressed in white slowly walked behind Meng Qi. The long sword that was shining brilliantly like a star just now flew back to its owner's side. The sword's hilt slightly drooped and obediently rubbed against his shoulder. Then it floated in the air motionlessly. Big Brother Pei. Si Kongxing's eyes lit up as he greeted the newcomer. It's him. It really is him. I knew it. Only he could have such a sword strike. The practitioners who were watching this sword strike were also discussing in low voices. They were looking at the white-robed man, Pei Mufeng, the number one of the younger generation of sword Xiao in the Eastern lands. There were even a few people who knew Xiao Ran. Their gazes secretly moved back and forth between him and Pei Mufeng. They just didn't know which of these two was the number one of the younger generation's sword Xiao in the 3,000 worlds. Only now did Meng Qi slowly exhale and stand up. The light on the pigeon egg-sized Stardust stone had dimmed a lot. She put it back into her storage bag. You're here. Meng Qi turned and smiled slightly at the white-robed man. Yes. Si Kongxing also put away the black waves. Pei Mufeng walked to the two people. I saw Senior Ling go to the valley over there, so I followed him to take a look. How was it? Meng Qi's expression became serious as he asked. It was blocked. Pei Mufeng said. There's a very strange force that blocked me outside the valley. I couldn't see what was happening inside. I waited there for 2 hours. Senior Ling still hadn't come out, so I came to find you. Meng Qi. Li Che interrupted. Come and take a look at this person. As he spoke, he hurriedly ran to the spell Xiao who was lying on the ground. The spell Xiao was already injured. Now, Pei Mufeng directly destroyed his natal magic weapon. Moreover, the power of that sword was too shocking. Other than his natal magic weapon, he was also injured by that sword. At this moment, he was lying on the ground powerlessly. His back was arched, and there were spots of blood on his face and chest. He looked like a cooked prawn. He looked extremely miserable. The natal magic weapon that was cut in half by Pei Mufeng's sword fell beside him. It had already lost its previous light. It looked as dim as its owner. Meng-Chi. Li Che half knelt and turned the spell Xiao over. Come and look at his eyes. As he spoke, he was also angry that this person was greedy for Meng-Chi's Stardust Stone. He unceremoniously opened the spell Xiao's eyes. The spell Xiao's body twitched, but he did not have the strength to resist. Li Che completely subconsciously stuffed a yang recovery pill into the spell Xiao's mouth. He said, "After he saw your Stardust Stone, the blood-red glow in his eyes appeared again." He paused and moved aside slightly to let Meng-Chi and the others see the spell Xiao's eyes clearly. After waiting for a moment, Li Che raised his head and looked at Meng-Chi. If the blood-red glow was caused by the Stardust Stone, we all saw it. Why did the blood-red glow in his eyes appear again? He seemed to be answering this question, but also seemed to be talking to himself. Because he was greedy for your things. Li Che paused again and repeated, because he was greedy for other people's things. He wanted to take other people's things for himself. He had a new desire. He looked at Meng-Chi's eyes and said, so, there was a blood-red glow in his eyes again. Just now, Meng-Chi's tone was firm. The Thousand Emperors' bell did not ring. So, Li Che followed her words and said, the blood-red glow was not caused by the Thousand Emperors' bell. He raised his head and looked at the sky. Meng-Chi was also like him. He stood with his hands behind his back and looked at the sky. Greed, blood-red glow, gradually losing control, unwillingness, desire, and desire in the depths of her heart. These thoughts flashed through her mind quickly. Falling heartwood, this thing could make people hallucinate. It could make people see what they wanted to see the most, and it could also turn people into puppets. But it was not enough. The blood-red glow in her eyes, and the voice full of killing and hatred that had also sounded in her heart just now. At this time, several medical cultivators gathered around Meng-Chi and Li Che. They had been helping for a while and roughly knew what had happened here. They had even heard Meng-Chi mention the falling heartwood. The medical cultivators were all deep in thought. Sikong Xing, Qiao Ran, and the others looked at each other. They could fight as attackers. But at this time, he really couldn't help at all. Li Che was deep in thought while he treated the medical cultivator's injuries in a daze. He did it completely subconsciously, as if he could not control his hands at all. The medical cultivator was still lying on the ground, breathing heavily. Qiao Ran learned from his mistake. He stopped his natal sword in front of Meng-Chi and took a step forward to stand closer to her. If there was any movement, his long sword would explode and hurt people. He promised that this time, his sword would not be slower than Pei Mufeng's. He would never lose to him. Qiao Ran thought as he glanced at Pei Mufeng. The white-robed man looked gentle and handsome. His eyes were as clear as mountain spring water and as bright as stars. When his sword was not in his hand, he was the most elegant and noble young master in the world. Of course, when his sword was in his hand, he was one of the strongest and sharpest swords in the 3,000 worlds. His magnificence was unparalleled. Not only would he not lose to him in terms of sword, but he would also not lose to him in terms of appearance. Qiao Ran silently added another sentence in his heart. At this time, Meng-Chi lowered her head and glanced at Qiao Ran. Suddenly, her eyes flashed, and she almost jumped to Qiao Ran's side. Fellow Taoist Qiao. Meng-Chi's tone suddenly became fervent. What were you thinking about just now? She even reached out and held Qiao Ran's wrist tightly. Her gaze was even more fervent than her tone. Chapter 166. What's wrong with Taoist Qiao? Just as Meng-Chi finished speaking, Li Che also came over. He stared at Qiao Ran's eyes for a moment before turning to look at Meng-Chi. Meng-Chi, Taoist Qiao's eyes, Li Che seemed to be mumbling to himself. This is not the Thousand Emperor Bell. It really shouldn't be the Thousand Emperor Bell. What are you guys talking about? At this time, Chun Yu, who had worked with him the longest and was the first to be rescued, also came over. Qiao Ran. He looked at Qiao Ran's face and suddenly exclaimed. Actually, the blood in Qiao Ran's eyes was already thicker than before, but it was still much lighter compared to the other practitioners. A thin layer of blood mist filled his eyes, but it was still possible to distinguish between black and white eyes. He slowly blinked his eyes and looked at Li Che, Chunyu, and finally at Meng Qi, not understanding why the three of them were looking at him with such fanaticism. "Be careful." Before he could answer Meng Qi and the others' questions, Qiao Ran suddenly took a step forward and lightly raised his hand. Wukyuox. Calm his natal sword, which had been hanging in the air, suddenly soared into the sky and clashed with a long sword in the air. Qiao Ran could be considered as one of the strongest sword practitioners in the younger generation in Western Jia, but the sword that was attacking him did not seem to be weaker than him. Moreover, that sword was very fast. Oomph. Qiao Ran snorted coldly, his expression becoming more and more serious. He raised his sword and stood with a frown. Want to compete with speed? His Void Breaker sect would not be weaker than other sword practitioner sections. Two narrow, thin, and sharp long swords attacked madly in the air like a storm. Dang, dang, dang. The sounds of swords clashing together sounded extremely intense. Qiao Ran controlled the sword with his right hand and pulled with his left hand. Naturally, he pulled Meng Qi behind him and instructed, "Junior Marshal Sister, stand behind me. Be careful." As he spoke, he quickly glanced at Pei Mufeng from the corner of his eyes. The white-robed swordsman was still standing in the wind, his long sword hanging by his side. His expression was serious. Obviously, Pei Mufeng realized that he was slower than him and decided not to attack. Qiao Ran told himself silently in his heart. He was in high spirits. His control over his lifeblood sword became steadier and faster. His attacks became sharper. However, no matter how hard he attacked, the other party would still be able to deal with it. He was an expert. But who was this expert sword cultivator that suddenly appeared? Qiao Ran looked at the two swords fighting intensely in the air. As disciples of large sects, most of the experts of the same generation might not know each other, but they would at least have heard of each other's names. For example, although he and Pei Mufeng had never fought before, they were not strangers to each other. Even if they could not see the other party, as long as they could see the other party's sword, they would be able to guess who they had met. However, the owner of the sword in the air. Many young sword cultivator experts' names flashed through Qiao Ran's mind, but he quickly rejected them. Such a swift and sharp sword. If he had seen it once, he would definitely not forget it. What Qiao Ran did not know was that Meng Qi, who he pulled behind him to protect, was looking at the sky with a complicated expression after he made his move. After a while, Meng Qi, Li Che, and Chunyu, who were standing at the side, looked at each other. Actually, it was not just her. At this moment, those spell cultivators and sword cultivators who had been healed were sitting on the ground in groups of 2s and 3s, as well as those medical cultivators who were free and did not have any other cultivators to treat. They all looked at the sky in puzzlement. There was only Qiao Ran's own sword, which continuously slashed through the air with incomparable speed. The young sword cultivator expert of Western Jia, the strongest of the younger generation of Broken Void sect, Ling Ji's most valued disciple. Qiao Ran's identity involuntarily flashed through many people's minds, and then they could not help but sigh. His sword is really strong. Qiao Ran's life-bond sword unscrupulously drew strange lines in the air, sharp and swift. Even Pei Mufeng was looking up at the sky, silently, his expression even more serious than before. Illusion. Meng Qi slowly spat out these two words in a low voice. He is fighting with the enemy in his imagination. Chunyu continued. There are people everywhere here. Li Che could not help but look around. Why is he fighting with the enemy in his imagination? As the three of them spoke, they could not help but turn their heads to look at Xue Qingxian. This was also a young cultivator from Western Jia. He should be the #1 medical cultivator in Western Jia. Since just now, he had been looking into the distance with a vigilant expression, occasionally muttering something. His life-bond talisman was a silver needle. The silver needle of a medical cultivator could be used to heal and save people, and it could also be used as a weapon. Xue Qingxuan's silver needle was always floating next to its master. The sun shone down, revealing a cold glint at the tip of the needle. It also looked extremely sharp. The blood mist in the eyes of the eldest son of the Wind Alliance's Shui family was not thick. At this time, his black and white eyes could also be seen clearly. Only a thin layer of blood was left. So they could see that his eyes were full of vigilance and vigilance, as if there was a terrifying enemy in the direction he was looking. But in that direction, Meng-Chi followed his gaze and looked over. Outside the city walls, there were endless green mountains. At least, she could not see any danger that could make Shui Qingxian so vigilant. Illusion. Meng-Chi silently repeated these two words in her heart. It was not like what Ling Ji had said, that it had aroused their unwillingness and desire, and filled them with killing intent and violence. But it had made them see some illusions. It's an illusion. This time, Meng-Chi's tone became very certain. The falling heart can bring about illusions, but it is not enough. Yes, Li Che nodded. The falling heart can make people see what they want to see the most, what they desire the most. It should not cause people to kill. He paused and then immediately said, there are many kinds of ling grasses and flowers that can make people hallucinate, but there are not many that can poison people silently. Chun Yu immediately said, yes. Meng-Chi also nodded. There's so many Xiuzhi here. Even if the spell Xiu and sword Xiu did not sense anything, there are so many medical Xiu here. Unless it is colorless and tasteless, it is impossible for them not to notice anything. Then colorless and tasteless things that can make people hallucinate. Chun Yu immediately began to recall. The jasper vine can do it, the heavenly underworld flower can also do it, and the Yao stargrass and red void grass can also do it, the black tortoise fish in the ice lake of the north. Candles made with their fat and blood can also cause illusions. The rolling worms of the south are used to make insect repellent powder. Rolling them into ashes and burning them directly can also create illusions. The east. At this time, the medical show gathered here were from the east, north, south, and west. Other than Meng-Chi, they were all from the top medical show sects in the 3,000 worlds. Even in the south, where medical show was declining, the Songhai Academy that Li Che belonged to was only slightly weaker than other sections. Moreover, the south was famous for having many poisonous insects and grasses. He had more experience in this area than the others. Everyone was talking at once. After a while, Le named more than 10 kinds of colorless and tasteless medicines that were hard to detect. Meng-Chi still felt that something was wrong. Being able to see illusions and being able to cause people to kill each other were two different things. She lowered her head slightly. With a thought, she looked at her own Ling Hai with her divine sense. Above her Ling Hai, the 5-spirit cauldron was not there for the time being. However, the medical practice handbook that Lin Yin gave her was still floating above her Ling Hai. It floated slowly along with the spiritual energy that gushed out from her internal elixir. Meng-Chi's divine sense moved again. A circle of light flashed across the medical practice handbook, and then it swayed gently. Until now, she was still unable to see all the contents of the medical practice handbook. She could only open a few of the scrolls. In her Ling Hai, using her divine sense to read the medical practice handbook was much faster than using her eyes to see. In just a moment, Meng-Chi had finished reading all that she could see. Nothing. The light on the medical practice handbook slowly dissipated. The medical Xiu standing around Meng-Chi were still discussing. Xiao Ran's natal sword was still drawing strange lights in the air. What exactly was it? Meng-Chi narrowed her eyes and subconsciously turned her head to look at Yun Xingyan. It seemed that from the moment they heard the 1,000 Emperor's bell, Yun Xingyan had been standing in the same place, without moving. The white-clothed man was incomparably handsome. He stood in the wind with a faint smile on his face. He seemed to have felt Meng-Chi's gaze and looked at her. One of them was behind the city wall, while the other was below the city wall. They were a little far apart. Fortunately, Ashio's eyesight was very good. Meng-Chi could still clearly see Yun Xingyan smile. Her face heated up. Because she couldn't find an answer, her anxious heart suddenly calmed down. Meng-Chi calmed herself down and slowly turned her gaze back. Qin Yanzhenjun was still there, within her sight. She suddenly felt that there was nothing to worry about. There's one more question. At this time, another medical Shio said, there are so many hallucinogenic elixirs and herbs. Do we test them one by one? According to what I know, some of them are incurable. We only need 3 to 5 days for the effects to fade. Naturally, it will be fine. He asked, what's more, do we have that much time and medicine to treat it? Brother Liu is right. Another person said, some hallucinogenic elixirs and herbs are not even considered poison. Even if we directly use elixirs or healing spells, I'm afraid it won't have any effect. But if we continue to fight like this, there will be people dying soon. So, is this still considered a battle of the 10 Extremes mountain? If they lose and get killed, will they be sent out of the 10 Extremes mountain battlefield like that person said, or... Another medical Shio paused and said with a heavy tone, directly die? A trace of fear and reluctance flashed across the medical Shio's faces. None of them dared to take the risk. Among the Shio who were full of reverence for life, there were definitely many medical Shio. When the discussion reached this point, there was a bit of an awkward silence. The medical cultivators didn't say anything else. They didn't mind testing the poison on their own. Most of the spells that medical Shio cultivated were healing spells. Furthermore, they had been working with elixirs and herbs all year round. It could be said that if they were poisoned by the same poison, even if the spell Shio and sword Shio were already unconscious, they would still be able to cleanse themselves of the poison. But now, to test the poison on so many young Shio, everyone really did not have the heart to do it. For a moment, no one spoke. Li Che could not help but look around at everyone. Then, he turned his head and quietly looked at Meng Qi. Shui Chengxian. Meng Qi said slowly. Li Che was stunned. Meng Qi had already decisively walked towards Shui Chengxian, who was looking at the distance with a guarded expression. Li Che was stunned. Most of the other medical Shio did not speak. Shui Chengxian was also a medical cultivator, and he was the one who was the most proficient in medical cultivation among them. Among the younger generation of medical Shio in the 3 realms, even the disciples from the Wind Alliance would not be stronger than Shui Chengxian. In other words, if ordinary medical Shio could test the poison themselves, he would be more resistant. Moreover, he came from the Wind Alliance, an ancient sect that had existed for tens of thousands of years. They definitely had more inheritances and secrets than most of the people here. The most important thing was that he was clearly seeing some illusions right now. No one knew if Shui Chengxian would have any problems if he went down like this. So, they could use him to test the poison? Chinyu scratched his head. These young medical Shio all saw Shui Chengxian as their goal. He was a genius of their generation that they wanted to surpass, but also respected. Moreover, he came from the Wind Alliance. The Wind Alliance was also the most sacred place in the hearts of medical Shio. Using him as a test subject, although it sounded bold, it was actually a little exciting. What should they do? Meng Qi had already stopped beside Shui Chengxian. Did you notice? We saved someone who was injured, Meng Qi said. The blood in his eyes will temporarily fade. Yes, Li Che also followed, but it hasn't been completely removed. He pointed at the magic Shio who wanted to sneak attack Meng Qi and steal her Stardust Stone. He curled his lips. Once you become greedy like that person, the blood in your eyes will reappear. That's right. A medical cultivator nodded. In other words, this thing doesn't last forever. That person recalled what he saw when he was trapped in the illusion. Just now, I heard someone continuously telling me that I was clearly stronger than magic Shio and sword Shio. Why they look down on me? That medical Shio frankly recounted his experience just now. Then, I took a medicine knife and attacked. As he spoke, he smiled embarrassedly. I occasionally have such thoughts. I always feel that the 3 realms have neglected medical Shio too much. I fought with the guy who stole my junior marshal's sister. Chinyu took the initiative to speak. Faced with everyone's puzzled gazes, he hurriedly said, I don't hate that guy for stealing my junior marshal's sister. But later on, he actually... Chinyu frowned and turned his head away. It was obvious that he didn't want to continue speaking. However, Everyone could roughly guess what he wanted to say. Li Che patted Chun Yu's shoulder. I wanted to teach those guys a lesson for stealing our sect spirit herbs a lesson. Another medical Shio took the initiative to speak. Although medical Shio's status in the north is slightly higher than in the south, it is still far inferior to sword Shio and magic Shio sections. The weather in the north is even worse. Although there are some rare spirit herbs and flowers, there are very few spirit herbs that are commonly seen in the other three realms here. Therefore, medical Shio sects like to grow their own spirit herbs. Most sects have a few spirit herbs that are rich in spirit energy. The one who spoke was also a female medical Shio. She was dressed in a light yellow robe and had a rather elegant appearance. She paused for a moment before continuing. Our sect has a piece of spirit herb land. Some of the spirit herbs and flowers in it have been cultivated for 100 years. However, they forcefully took it away. Although we were angry, we didn't dare to say anything. We only begged them to give us 3 months to find a new spirit herb land and move the spirit herbs and flowers away. Then, we would give that land to them. The more the female medical Shio spoke, the angrier she became. Her originally gentle oval eyes were about to spit fire. My master begged them in a low voice and begged them. He almost knelt down in front of them. Even so, they were unwilling. After forcefully taking away that land, they chased all of us away. Some of the spirit herbs and flowers in the spirit herb land have been cultivated for 100 years. They took all of them away. However, they don't know how to deal with them at all. The female medical Shio raised her voice, and her eyes instantly turned red. The spirit herb land that our sect has cultivated for 1,000 years was destroyed just like that. This is too much. This is too much. F***CK. Which sect? Tell us. Are they from the 10 Greats? They are simply bandits. The medical Shio were instantly enraged. In the 3 realms, Sword Shio and Dharma Shio were unparalleled. Medical Shio were not strong. Sometimes, they were indeed inferior to Sword Shio and Dharma Shio. Apart from the Wind Alliance, most medical Shio sects were indeed inferior to Sword Shio and Dharma Shio sects in the north. Everyone had more or less suffered grievances in their daily lives. However, there were not many who were as excessive as this. Fellow Taoists, tell us their names. In the future, we will definitely not treat anyone in their sect. Someone immediately shouted, "That's right. Fellow Taoists, tell us their names." Another person said, "What the hell? We already gave the land to them. We can't even wait 3 months. Why? They are certain that everyone in their sect is made of bronze and will never get hurt, right? Tell us, fellow Taoist. We all support you." I'm so angry. Don't the Wind Alliance and the Medical Shio Alliance care? Isn't the #1 sect in the North Territory the Flying Star Valley? The sect master of the Flying Star Valley is famous for being chivalrous and impartial. Don't they care? The female Medical Shio glanced at the person who spoke. She wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. Huh. The person froze and almost jumped up. Did the Flying Star Valley do this? It can't be. Isn't Sect Master Xiang of the Flying Star Valley famous for being chivalrous and righteous? I heard that he is one of the people most likely to reach the Mahayana realm because of his open-mindedness. No wonder we, the elite disciples of the top 10 sects of the 4 realms, were provoked by the illusions and ended up in such a bloody battle. It seems that we are all rotten to the core. On behalf of myself, I won't save the people of the Flying Star Valley in the future. I won't save them either. Disgusting. Bah. I don't want to save them either. But when we leave this place, do you still remember? The female medical Shio was stunned. Her long eyelashes fluttered a few times and she didn't say anything. Meng Qi's gaze swept across the faces of the medical Shio, who were filled with righteous indignation. She found that the eyes of the medical Shio who were the most indignant and said that they wouldn't save the people of the Flying Star Valley had a faint redness. She hurriedly pulled Li Che beside her and motioned for him to look at those people. Li Che sucked in a breath of cold air and murmured, "But why? They didn't do anything wrong." He suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air, angry. The guy who wanted to steal your Stardust Stone was greedy. 7 emotions flower. Meng Qi blurted out almost at the same time. I'm afraid there might be falling heartwood. She paused and said, it's rare in the 3,000 worlds, but this is the 10 Extremes mountain. There won't be any falling heartwood. With the leaves of the falling heartwood as a guide and the 7 emotions flower, then Meng Qi frowned. But what's with the 1,000 Emperor's Bell? Even if Ling Ji misheard and made a mistake, she didn't believe that Qin Yanzhenjun would make a mistake. She believed it anyway. Yin Qin Yin couldn't be wrong. 7 emotions flower, 7 emotions flower. Li Che murmured. 7 emotions flower. Qin Yu also came over. If it's the 7 emotions flower, he frowned and felt that it was very tricky. Then it'll be troublesome, because the 7 emotions flower had no antidote. In other words, the 7 emotions flower wasn't a poison and didn't need an antidote. After 3 or 4 days, the effect would subside and everyone would be fine. This thing also existed in the 3,000 worlds. It wasn't a rare thing. Occasionally, some shoujo would even use the 7 emotions flower as medicine, because it could magnify people's 7 emotions and 6 desires. Some shoujo and even ordinary people would occasionally use it to liven things up. On the other side, the medical shoujo became more and more excited as they talked. Many of the medical shoujo in the 3,000 worlds have been suppressed by the Dharma shoujo and sword shoujo of the same age. Their sects were often compared to the Dharma shoujo and sword shoujo sects of the same age. Other than those few people, the redness that had faded from the eyes of a few medical shoujo reappeared. Although it was much fainter than before, it still couldn't be ignored. 3 or 4 days, we can't afford to wait. Li Che frowned. Meng Qi nodded. She looked around. Previously, no one paid much attention to it, but now they saw it. On the hillside of the mountain where the city was located, flowers as small as grains of rice were scattered among the grass. The 7 colored flowers bloomed all over the hillside. When we went up the mountain just now, we didn't talk about this. The flowers of the 7 emotions flower were too small. Although they were red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and purple, they weren't conspicuous at all among the grass. In addition, this thing wasn't considered poison, so it was very difficult to attract everyone's attention. Meng Qi still said with certainty, when we came up from the bottom of the mountain just now, there weren't any of these flowers on the hillside. So these flowers only bloomed after you went up the mountain to the bottom of the city wall? Qin Yu asked. It should be. Meng Qi nodded. Meng Qi's heart suddenly moved. She quickly turned her head and looked at the hillside. On the hillside, 7 colored flowers were scattered all over the ground. However, it wasn't messy. The seemingly inconspicuous flowers were denser in some places and sparser in other places. It was like when someone sprinkled seeds. There were more in some places and less in other places. It definitely wasn't that simple. From the moment they entered the 10 Extremes mountain, every step had a deeper meaning. These 7 emotions flowers quietly broke through the soil and bloomed when they weren't paying attention. They definitely wouldn't sprinkle seeds randomly. I want to go out and take a look, Meng Qi said, but they're still fighting. No, this place is full of danger and strangeness. You should stay with me. I'll go with you. A clear voice sounded beside Meng Qi. Pei Mufeng, who hadn't spoken much, walked over and stood beside Meng Qi. Okay. Meng Qi didn't stand on ceremony with him. At this time, if they really waited for 3 or 4 days, the effects of the 7 emotions flower would disappear by itself. They might be completely wiped out. They couldn't afford to delay. Li Che, Meng Qi said, you guys continue to guard here. I'll go with Brother Pei to take a look. Oh, okay. Li Che nodded. Let's go. Meng Qi called out to Pei Mufeng, then looked at those medical practitioners who were still making a ruckus. Xiao Ran's sword was still flying around in the air. It looked handsome and strong, but unfortunately, there wasn't a single opponent. Even Meng Qi was curious. What exactly did he see? Pei Mufeng and Meng Qi walked along the city wall in another direction away from the battlefield. He heard what Meng Qi said to Li Che and the others. As the young sect leader of the number 1 sword practitioner sect in the East, Pei Mufeng had also heard of the 7 emotions flower. He was silent for a moment, then asked. Li Che wasn't affected by the seven emotions flower from the beginning. Why is that? The seven emotions flower will release Master's seven emotions and six desires. Meng Qi tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. It's not a poison, but there's not only the seven emotions flower here, there's also the fallen heart tree. When these two things are added together, it will cause the desires and desires that are usually hidden in the bottom of everyone's heart, the most secretive ones, and even the ones that they themselves are not aware of, to have nowhere to hide. Meng Qi's heart moved slightly when she said this. She was also filled with killing intent at the beginning. At that moment, she was also filled with hatred and unwillingness. She paused, then continued. So for a person who has no desires and desires, it's completely useless. Meng Qi thought for a moment, then said, Li Che only cares about saving people and medicine. He's pure and untainted. So even if it's the seven emotions flower and the fallen heart tree, it won't affect him at all. I see. Pei Mufeng nodded. What about you? He continued to accompany Meng Qi along the city wall and around the mountain peak. Meng Qi casually responded while observing the distribution of the seven emotions flower on the hillside. What about me? You don't seem to be affected. Meng Qi hesitated for a moment, then said, I'm affected. In her previous life, she regarded Pei Mufeng as her confidant. He wasn't a talkative person, and the two of them shared many secrets that only they knew. Oh, Pei Mufeng responded faintly and didn't continue to ask. Meng Qi was silent for a moment, then slowly said in a low voice, I will also complain that the heavens are unfair. She looked up at Pei Mufeng as she said this, and the corners of her lips curled up into a smile. Then Meng Qi quickly turned his head and looked outside the city walls once more. Her body suddenly stiffened, and her hair felt heavy. A slender hand gently patted her head. It's okay, Pei Mufeng said. The heavens are unfair. We will change it together. Before Meng Qi could react, a strong force suddenly came from her waist. Pei Mufeng grabbed her waist and quickly moved back. Then, the natal sword that was always by his side and inseparable from him suddenly soared into the sky. The sword light was like a falling star, and it streaked across Meng Qi's eyes. Chapter 167. At this moment in the Ten Extremes Mountain, on a distant green mountain by the cliff, a man who was originally sitting cross-legged retracted one of his legs. The smile on his face was still lazy. On his young and handsome face, those eyes that seemed to be filled with vicissitudes of life were dyed with a trace of amusement. They actually found the seven emotions flower. TSK. Behind him, the white-haired man chuckled proudly. I've said it before. Since little Yen has chosen her, she must have something special about her. But what's the use of finding the seven emotions flower? The small sword beside the man by the cliff flew even faster, like a shooting star. Occasionally, bits of starlight would sprinkle down. They can barely maintain their consciousness. The people they can use are, he really counted with his fingers, little girl is one, that little red fox is one, and there's also a medical practitioner. The man's eyes suddenly brightened. There's also that little sword cultivator who's with her. This doll is not bad. Even if we count that little friend who refined the crescent moon, they still aren't enough. 7 people. The sword cultivator was a bit proud and even a bit gloating. It's enough to give them a headache. Pa! The sword cultivator was heavily slapped on the back of his head. Shut up! The red-clothed woman walked to the cliff and focused her gaze into the distance. Humph. If she can't gather 7 people, then you can go help her. She said almost unreasonably. Otherwise, I'll push you off the cliff. The red-clothed woman said this, but she was still a bit worried. That little white tiger still hasn't moved? She lightly bit her lower lip, and her gaze wandered. Even if his realm is suppressed, he shouldn't be completely unaware. The sword cultivator laughed and said, he's indeed very strong, but there's a phrase called concern causes confusion, and another phrase called pa. Ouch! He was slapped on the back of his head by the red-clothed woman. The sword cultivator was not angry, and instead laughed. You're like this, it shows that you're also guilty. After all, you've all seen how strong little Yin is. Pa, hey, you're too arrogant. I'm gonna get angry. Just stop talking. The white-haired man glared at him and comforted the red-clothed woman. Don't listen to his nonsense. Look at where the little white tiger is standing. He pointed into the distance, and the clouds on the mountain peak in front of him quickly retreated to the sides as if they had received an order. The white-robed Yin Xingyin stood where the white-haired man was pointing. The red-clothed woman's eyes lit up. Even a lazy man sitting by the cliff slightly straightened his body. His expression was much more serious than before. He stared intently at Yun Qingyan. Suddenly, he shuddered. The sword cultivator licked his dry lips and muttered, "Just now, was he looking at us?" Meng Qi stood on the city wall, holding the medicine knife in his right hand and looking at the sky. In the distance, Pei Mufeng's sword was like the brightest star in the sky, cutting across the sky. In the air, there were 4 other swords. The light from the swords converged and attacked Pei Mufeng from 4 directions. The 4 swords didn't look very eye-catching. Meng Qi's eyesight was very good. He could see some simple but somewhat strange patterns engraved on the sword hilts. Moreover, the 4 swords didn't fight separately. Instead, they seemed to form a sword formation. They attacked and defended well with each other. Meng Qi didn't know much about swords. Pei Mufeng and the 4 swords' sword moves weren't complicated. They were all open and closed. Therefore, he could faintly see that if the opponent only had 1 sword, he wouldn't be Pei Mufeng's opponent. The 4 swords attacked together. They attacked and defended well. Pei Mufeng's sword was suppressed. Sword formation? Meng Qi's eyes were focused on the sword coming from the east. That sword was slightly wider, and its blade was longer. Just from its appearance alone, it looked more domineering than the other 3 swords. Therefore, this sword focused on killing and attacking. There weren't many changes in the sword moves. Meng Qi stared at it for a moment and roughly grasped the sword's pattern. Her gaze fell on the second sword. This sword came from the north. Its body was shorter, but it was wider and thicker. It looked very stable. This sword focused on defense. Its pattern wasn't complicated either. It was just that whenever Pei Mufeng's sword was about to touch the other 3 swords, it would rush to block the attack. It looked wide and thick, but it was actually very flexible. Meng Qi looked at the other 2 swords. The 2 swords from the west and the south looked almost the same. They were very flexible. They were always higher than the other 2 swords. Whenever Pei Mufeng showed a slight flaw, the 2 swords would quickly attack his flaw as if they smelled blood. The 4 swords seemed to cooperate with each other. Each of them had their own attack and defense. In fact, the main attack was the sword coming from the east. Meng Qi believed that with Pei Mufeng's eyesight, it was impossible for him not to see this point. His long sword flashed with cold light. Each of the swords moved towards the sword in the east. However, the 4 swords cooperated well. The sword in the east was always able to avoid Pei Mufeng's attack with the help of the other 3 swords. Sometimes, it would even attack from a completely unexpected angle. Its trajectory was very tricky and unexpected. It's a sword formation. Meng Qi looked for a moment and became more and more certain. She suddenly took out a few spirit stones, raised her hand, and threw them into the sky. The spirit stones drew a bright trajectory in the air. Meng Qi's speed wasn't fast, but she calculated it very accurately. With a clang, her spirit stones hit the body of the sword in the east. Rather than saying that her spirit stones hit the sword, it was better to say that Meng Qi threw the spirit stones in advance. The sword in the east hit the sword by itself. It's the 4 seasons order formation. When the spirit stones were sent flying by the sword, Meng Qi became more and more certain. This is the 4 seasons order formation. It's the formation Ji Wujiang taught her, so it can be used in a sword formation. As Meng Qi thought, another spirit stone flew out. Of course, she wouldn't use a Xian spirit stone. She used an ordinary 3rd stage spirit stone. With another clang, the spirit stone was sent flying by the sword in the east again. Meng Qi was even more certain. Swish, 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 she threw out 3 spirit stones in a row. Pei Mufeng raised his hand. His natal sword actually rushed towards the direction where Meng Qi threw the spirit stones without hesitation. These 4 swords were a bit strange, but they were still not his match. Pei Mufeng could also see that the 4 swords were not his match. It would take a lot of time and effort to break the formation. If it was another time, Pei Mufeng would want to break the sword formation to see if his sword were stronger or if the sword formation was stronger. But right now, they were in a trap. Every second was precious. Pei Mufeng suddenly whistled. His long sword instantly turned into sword shadows. The sword shadows were unparalleled in speed. It was like countless meteors falling to the ground. They rushed towards the strongest sword in the sword formation. Clang, clang, clang. The sound was endless. It was unknown how many times Pei Mufeng hit the sword. In the end, the strongest sword in the sword formation was hit lower and lower. It broke into 2 pieces and fell on the city wall with 2 clang sounds. The other 3 swords rushed over to help. How could they make it in time? Pei Mufeng gently raised his hand. The long sword suddenly turned upwards. It was like a domineering monarch sweeping through the ages. In a brilliant sword light, the 3 swords were swept away by the sword Qi and fell on the city wall one after another. Meng Qi walked over and picked up the 4 broken swords. There were a few simple patterns carved on the sword hilts. In spring, there were flowers. In summer, there were rain. In autumn, and in winter, there was snow. There were only a few strokes on the pattern. It looked simple and grand. It did not look like it was just carved. It looked like it had been through thousands of years. In terms of formations, Meng Qi was an expert. At least in the current 3,000 worlds, there was no one who was better than her. She glanced at it a few times. She could tell that the person who carved the 4 orders 4 hours formation was definitely better than Ji Wujiu. Moreover, these 4 swords were majestic and nimble. Zaya Shoba, conformations could be used like this. Meng Qi kept the 4 broken swords in her storage bag. She was going to show them to Yun Qingyan later. Pei Mufeng returned to her side. He silently watched her keep the broken swords and said, "Let's go." "Okay." Meng Qi nodded. The 2 of them continued to walk forward. On the hillside below the city wall, the 7 emotions flowers bloomed all over the hillside. Meng Qi's hand hung by her side. Her fingers moved gently, outlining the pattern of the 7 emotions flowers. Fortunately, other than the sword formation formed by the 4 swords, they did not encounter any other obstacles on the way. In a short while, they had walked around more than half of the city wall. Seeing that they had walked the last section of the city wall and were about to return to the place where the practitioners were gathered, Pei Mufeng, who had been silent all the way, asked, "Did you see anything?" Meng Qi's finger tapped lightly on the side of her body. She was not sure. "It looks a bit like a painting." "A painting?" Pei Mufeng asked. "Yes." Meng Qi nodded. She had thought that the little Jin city at the peak of the mountain looked like it was related to formations. The 7 emotions flowers might also be related to formations. However, after looking around, Meng Qi did not see any signs of formations. Instead, there were clusters of flowers, one deep and one shallow. It was like someone had used the mountain as a canvas to draw an ink painting. She sketched out the entire picture in her mind. If she connected them, Meng Qi shook her head. She couldn't see what it was. It seemed to have been casually splashed with ink. "Draw it so we can see?" Pei Mufeng suggested. "All right." Meng Qi took out a bamboo scroll from her storage pouch. Xiuzhe did not need paper and brush to draw and write. She gripped the bamboo scroll. Her mind moved, and a painting appeared on the paper. Meng Qi handed the bamboo scroll to Pei Mufeng. The other took it and sent a bit of Ling energy into it. He quickly shook his head. "I can't see it. I feel." Meng Qi looked down the slope and then at the Xiuzhe who were still fighting. Something is missing. There seemed to be multiple ordinary mountain peaks drawn on the bamboo scroll. The peaks rose and fell to form mountain ridges. Other than that, there was nothing else unusual. What was missing? Meng Qi took back the bamboo scroll and held it in her hand. The green mountains in the painting rose and fell. It was a bit of stretch to call a mountain. It was just a change of deep and shallow ink. The two quickly returned to the corner of the city wall. They had been gone for less than an hour. Li Che, Si Kongxing, and the others had rescued several Xiuzha. Meng Qi. Seeing her return, Si Kongxing hurriedly came up to greet her. "You're back." She had already heard from Li Che what Meng Qi and the others had gone to do. She hurriedly asked, "How was it? Did you find anything?" Meng Qi shoved the bamboo scroll to her. "The hillside is covered with 7 emotions flowers. I drew according to the distribution cloth of the 7 emotions flowers. Take a look." "Oh." Si Kongxing grasped the bamboo scroll and sent Ling energy into it. "Ah." She suddenly let out a small cry of surprise. This is this place. What is it?" Meng Qi's spirit rose, and he hurriedly asked. "It's a bit like the Starfall Sea of our Yao world." Si Kongxing said. "Isn't it a mountain?" Meng Qi asked blankly. "It's a mountain." Si Kongxing said, "The valley surrounded by the 7 mountains is the Starfall Sea of the Starfall Sea." Si Kongxing looked at the dazed Meng Qi and chuckled. "The Starfall Sea is connected to the 3 realms. The Starfall Sea of the Starfall Sea in each place is different. In the Yao world, the Starfall Sea of the Starfall Sea is in the valley. However, the Starfall Mountain is very high and very big. Legend has it that no one can climb to the top of the mountain. Moreover, the 7 mountains are the 7 killing array. In the picture you drew, the arrangement of the 7 mountains is the 7 killing array, isn't it?" Meng Qi was stunned. "In the middle of the 7 mountains is the Yao world's Starfall Sea of the Yao world." Si Kongxing continued. At this point, she lowered her voice and quietly leaned close to Meng Qi's ear. She whispered, "I heard from my father that the battle for the Demon Lord token is carried out in the Starfall Sea of the Starfall Sea. Usually, the Yao world can't see the Starfall Sea of the Starfall Sea because it's always covered in clouds. However, every 100 years, the clouds in the Starfall Sea of the Starfall Sea will disperse. Yao cultivators who can pass through the 7 killing mountain can enter the Starfall Sea of the Starfall Sea to fight for the Demon Lord token." Meng Qi's heart skipped a beat. She held the bamboo scroll in her hand. The 7 mountains on the scroll that originally looked ordinary seemed to have changed in her eyes. They became clearer. She opened her mouth. Her mouth was a little dry. She was a little uncertain. She had never been to the Yao world. Never. Whether it was in her previous life or this life, Meng Qi had never been to the Yao world. She had even been to the demon world and seen the most terrifying and darkest demon world, like the earthen prison. However, she had never been to the Yao world. Meng Qi opened her mouth again. She looked up at Si Kongxing blankly. Meng Qi. Si Kongxing waved his hand in front of her. "Are you okay? What happened to you?" "I seem to be fine," Meng Qi suddenly said, because at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded in her mind. That voice should be very familiar, but Meng Qi felt that she shouldn't have heard him speak like this. In her mind, Yin Xingyin's voice seemed to come from a faraway place. It was low and full of majesty that she had never heard before. The 7 killing array. The array's master is the 7 killing array. The positive and negative sides complement each other. The positive side is the 7 killing array, and the negative side is the 7 emotions. They are interlocked and will never break. Meng Qi heard her own voice asking Yin Xinyin, "Why are the 7 killing and 7 emotions mutually positive and negative? Shouldn't the killing and the emotions be opposite?" That's because Yin Xinyin seemed to be laughing in her mind, and his voice became gentle. Killing someone with love is unforgettable, and no one can avoid it. It's probably incurable. Meng Qi heard herself replying, though she did not fully understand. "Oh, when did this happen? Why didn't she remember that such a thing had happened? When did it happen?" She could not remember ever learning this 7 killing formation, or rather, the 7 emotions formation. Meng Qi had a good memory, and she had always admired Yin Xinyan. She could remember everything he said and everything he taught her, But why couldn't she remember the 7-killing array at all? Meng-Chi? Chi-Chi? A fair and slender hand waved in front of Meng-Chi's eyes again. Xing's crisp voice called Meng-Chi back to reality. Meng-Chi, are you okay? Yes. Meng-Chi nodded slowly, temporarily putting her doubts to the back of her mind. This. She looked around. Maybe a big array. There is indeed a big array in the city, Xing said, not fully understanding. And the big array is interconnected with the small array. She reminded Meng-Chi, did you forget? Previously, they asked me and Chu Tianfeng to guard the small array in the city. No. Meng-Chi stomped her feet and pointed to the bottom of her feet. The whole mountain is an array. Ah, Xing was stunned. This time, she looked at Meng-Chi blankly. Meng-Chi, look. Li Che, who happened to be beside Meng-Chi and the others, suddenly shouted, Senior Ling, that side. He raised his hand and pointed to the front. Meng-Chi and the others suddenly turned their heads and looked in the direction of his finger. On the horizon, a tall and slender figure leaped high into the air and then dropped down rapidly. Under the sunlight, a cold light flickered. Ling Ji's long and narrow sword followed its master and fell down rapidly. At this moment, a rainbow-colored light rose from the surface of the ground, enveloping Ling Ji and his sword. Then, that light, along with Ling Ji and his sword, suddenly disappeared in midair. What's going on? Xing quickly rubbed her eyes and looked at the scene in front of her in disbelief. Senior Ling Ji. Was he swallowed by that light? What is that? Meng-Chi's face was slightly pale, but his gaze was very firm. I'm afraid this is the real test of the 10 Extremes Mountain. Meng-Chi's tone was firm. We must break this formation. Oh ho! At the peak of Gaoja Mountain far away, the sword cultivator at the edge of the cliff spread his hands. She actually discovered it. The white-haired man raised the corner of his lips proudly. At the same time, he was a little curious. I wanted to say last time, how can her attainment and talent in formations be so high? She's also a medical cultivator. The sword cultivator laughed carelessly. You medical cultivators have produced such a powerful monster. Shouldn't you be happy? The white-haired man frowned slightly. The medical path is difficult. She has such talent and attainment in formations, her Taoist heart. Heh. The man at the edge of the cliff stood up. You don't have to worry about this. He stretched lazily. At this moment, he was much more open-minded than the white-haired man. Young people have their own luck. Back then, most of the spiritual cultivators, sword cultivators, and formation cultivators also cultivated and listened, but they also achieved great success in the path of cultivation. What do you medical cultivators insist on? What do you know? The white-haired man snorted. We medical cultivators. Yes, yes, yes. I don't understand. The man at the edge of the cliff stomped his feet and moved his limbs casually. I'm guessing that little girl not only saw that there was a large formation waiting for them to break, but also knew what kind of formation it was. He smiled and looked at the white-haired man. Shall we make a bet? You're saying that she knows the 7 emotions formation? The white-haired man said, but this isn't. The 7 killing formation is the 7 killing formation. What's 7 emotions? Even if you give it a gentle veil, it can't hide its ruthlessness and brutality. The sword cultivator protested loudly. Shut up. The red-clothed woman took a step forward. Is the 7 emotions formation gentle? She sneered. Love kills. That's the true way to kill without spilling blood. It's cruel and heartless. I can't win against you. The sword cultivator cursed and turned his head to look into the distance. Suddenly, he rejoiced in their misfortune. The little girl wants to find 7 people first. F***CK. Before the sword cultivator could finish his words, the entire 10 Extremes mountain started to shake violently. Even the tallest mountain they were on began to shake. The shaking continued for almost the time it takes to burn a stick of incense before it stopped. Although the 3 people at the peak were not shaken down the mountain, their expressions changed slightly. This is... The white-haired man looked down the mountain, his eyes flashing. They actually opened the entrance to the Seven Emotions formation. The sword cultivator was speechless for a moment. That little girl looks so frail and weak, but her actions are so decisive. She's a talent. I can't help but admire her talent. But he shook his head and said, the people she can gather now are not the best combination. Let me see. The little fox is in charge of defense. The Falling Star Pavilion's child is an attacker. The little girl and another child is a medical cultivator for people. They also need 3 attackers, 2 spell cultivators, and 1 sword cultivator. The sword cultivator chuckled. The little girl from the Hidden Moon Valley who can summon the crescent moon is a spell cultivator. She's still missing 2 people. The sword cultivator chuckled. Otherwise, even if they find the entrance and go in, it will be very difficult for them to break the formation. On Little Jade City, time seemed to have stopped. The mountain peak that was filled with the sounds of fighting suddenly became completely silent. Those attacking spells, the life-bound swords in the air, all became completely still. It was as if they were suddenly frozen by a huge ice block. The entire mountain peak became incomparably quiet. What's going on? Sikong Xing looked around, stretched out her hand, and grabbed Meng Qi's arm. Meng Qi, what's going on? Meng Qi softly said, and did not say anything. What happened? Li Che also asked. He stood trembling beside Meng Qi and Sikong Xing. Although he was a medical cultivator, he still subconsciously protected the 2 girls behind him. Then he looked around vigilantly. Them? Why are they all motionless? Li Che said, looking at Meng Qi, Sikong Xing, and Pei Mufeng. His face was blank. Only the few of us are fine. Pei Mufeng nodded. He was calmer than Li Che and said, there should be someone else. As soon as Pei Mufeng finished speaking, an aloof figure slowly walked out from the thick fog under the city wall and slowly walked towards them. The crescent moon above Yin Xian's head was still shining faintly. The moonlight poured down, as if it was plated with a layer of soft light. His face that was stained with a few drops of blood no longer looked so cold. Yin Xian. Sikong Xing almost jumped up. She waved at Yin Xian. We're here. 5. Meng Qi said. She said, we're still missing 2 people. She turned her head to look at the city wall. Just now, there's a man in white standing there, like a pine tree or the moon. But now, there was no one in sight. There was only devastation everywhere. What do you mean by still missing 2 people? Sikong Xing did not understand and asked. To break the 7 kills formation, we need 7 people. Meng Qi said. As soon as the words 7 kills formation came out, 4 pairs of eyes focused on Meng Qi. Meng Qi? Sikong Xing was the first to react. 7 kills formation. What is this? She was a demon cultivator and was more familiar with formations. After all, demon cultivators were born with cultivation formations in their bodies. Even she had never heard of the 7 kills formation. Before Meng Qi could answer, another voice came from the city wall. Fuck! Someone cursed and then stood up shakily from the city wall. Chu Tianfeng. Sikong Xing almost jumped up. After she and Chu Tianfeng found Meng Qi and the others, they had been helping to bring the injured Xiuzhe to the medical cultivators for them to treat. The 2 did not always move together. Just now, Chu Tianfeng had gone to the city wall alone to find people. Here, Sikong Xing hurriedly waved at him. What happened? Chu Tianfeng rubbed his forehead as he walked towards them, holding a young man in his arms. I just helped him up and wanted to move him over, but a spell hit my back. As he spoke, he couldn't help but groan. Li Che hurriedly took the young man in Chu Tianfeng's arms and looked at him. He shook his head and sighed. It's not because of the injury. Like them, it suddenly stopped. Let me see your injury. Meng Qi turned to Chu Tianfeng's back and reached out to press the back of his head. Chu Tianfeng had just opened his mouth when a cool finger with a medicinal scent pressed on the back of his neck. Immediately after, a cool aura soothed the burning skin on the back of his neck. It's not serious. As Meng Qi spoke, he took out a porcelain bottle and sprinkled some medicinal powder on the wound. His left hand formed a seal and pressed it. I'll help you treat it first. It'll be better in a few days. Okay. Chu Tianfeng's body stiffened. He didn't dare to move for a long time, as if he was sealed. After a long while, Meng Qi withdrew his hand. Chu Tianfeng seemed to have been unsealed. His entire body swayed slightly. 6 people, Meng Qi said. What 6 people? Chu Tianfeng hurriedly asked, and he pointed at the surroundings, his gaze finally landing on the young Xiuzhe he had saved who seemed to have fainted. He asked, what happened to them? There's a large array here. Xikong Xing hurriedly explained. Meng Qi said that we must break this large array, but we need 7 people to break it. Except for us, they suddenly can't move. She said again. Chu Tianfeng seemed to want to say something, but when he heard the words Meng Qi said, he swallowed the words he wanted to say. Where's Qin Xiuma? He asked again as he looked around. Find him. We have enough people. Qin Xiuma. Meng Qi was stunned. That's right, Chu Tianfeng said matter-of-factly. If I can be here, Qin Xiuma can definitely be here too. He said in a firm tone. Then let's look for Qin Xiuma. Xikong Xing had fought side by side with them for a long time. She didn't doubt Chu Tianfeng's words at all. She immediately jumped down from the city wall. I saw him earlier. He seems to be over there. Meng Qi's group of 6 didn't dare to split up in this strange place. They simply followed Xikong Xing and jumped down from the city wall. Qin Xiuma. Chu Tianfeng lowered his voice and shouted. His gaze swept around. Qin Xiuma. Xikong Xing also shouted. Pei Mufeng followed behind the two of them. Li Che walked side by side with him. Meng Qi and Yin Xian walked to the back. She looked at Yin Xian and asked in a low voice, Are you okay? Don't worry, Yin Xian said lightly. Okay. Meng Qi nodded. Meng Qi. At this moment, Xikong Xing cheered and rushed to a man in black who had fallen to the ground. She turned her head and called to Meng Qi and the others. He's here. Qin Xiuma just fainted. He fought against 3 people by himself. His spiritual energy was almost exhausted. He fought until the end. Exhausted, all of them fainted on the ground. Meng Qi stuffed a biming pill into his mouth. Not long after, the man lying on the ground moved his eyelids and slowly opened his eyes. As soon as Qin Xiuma opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was not the blue sky, but a pair of slender hands. A slightly cool finger pressed against his forehead, and a wave of warm, spiritual energy entered his body from his forehead. Together with the medicinal pill that was stuffed into his mouth, the spiritual energy flowed along his limbs, bones, and meridians, and slowly flowed into his spiritual sea. A faint smell of medicine came from the finger that was very close to his nose. The sleeve of the green robe hung down slightly, just brushing the tip of his tall nose. Qin Xiuma felt like he was soaking in a hot spring. He only felt very comfortable. Moreover, the scene in front of him was so familiar. You're awake. A voice like a clear spring sounded. Then, the hand on his forehead was taken back. Meng Qi squatted beside him and looked at him with a pair of big clear eyes. You saved me again, Qin Xiuma said. His voice was slightly hoarse, with a hint of weakness after being in a coma for a long time. Meng Qi stuffed another biming pill into his mouth. Your spiritual energy was almost exhausted. That's why you fainted, she explained. Naturally, I woke up when my spiritual energy recovered. Meng Qi stood up. She didn't expect to be able to gather 7 people. She was also quite happy. Meng Qi, Xikong Xing said, then let's talk about breaking the formation now. Qin Xiuma took a deep breath and also stood up. He looked around and quickly asked, What's going on? What's 7 people? Xikong Xing was a straightforward person. She quickly explained the matter and finally said, Now we have 7 people. We can break this 7 kills formation. Oh, Qin Xiuma frowned. 7 kills formation? He looked at Meng Qi and asked, What's the 7 kills formation? I don't know much about it. Meng Qi said, I only know that there are 7 kills and 7 emotions. The right ones are the 7 kills, and the wrong ones are the 7 emotions. To break the formation, we need 7 people. But I don't know what's going on inside. In our demon realm, Sikong Xing said, "There are 7 mountains around the Starfall Sea. My father told me that they are the 7 Kills Formation. But I don't know what the 7 Kills Formation or the 7 Emotions Formation is." 7 Kills Formation? 7 Emotions? Hearing this, Yin Xian muttered these words several times and then said, "I seem to have seen these 2 names somewhere. I once picked up a jade slip in the Starfall Sea. After I gave it to the elders in the sect to study, they said that the jade slip mentioned the 7 Kills Formation." Pei Mufeng also said what he knew. The jade slip is profound and written in the demon language. Even the elders in the sect couldn't understand the specific content. They tried their best, but could only see the 2 words 7 kills. As he spoke, he took out a small jade slip from his storage bag and handed it to Sikong Xing. "This is it." The jade slip was light yellow and incomparably warm. There was only a very thin red bloodline in the middle. At a glance, one could tell that it was quite extraordinary. "It's our demon realm's jade slip," Sikong Xing said. Little Xian took it and slowly inserted a strand of spiritual energy into the jade slip. The few of them immediately looked at her expectantly. Now that everyone was working together to break the formation, Quan Jingdu would not hide anything. Yin Xian also closed his eyes and concentrated on recalling where he had seen the 7 Kills Formation or the 7 Emotions Formation. Who knew that as soon as Sikong Xing's spiritual energy entered the jade slip, the bright red bloodline on the jade slip suddenly lit up. Immediately after, she suddenly screamed. The hand holding the jade slip desperately waved a few times as if it was scalded. "Xing Xing?" Meng Qi hurriedly supported Sikong Xing's arm. Pei Mufeng raised his hand, and the jade slip fell back into his palm. I'm sorry." Sikong Xing hurriedly apologized. "I was just bitten by the jade slip." "Bitten?" Chu Tianfeng didn't understand. He took the jade slip from Chu Tianfeng's palm. The bright red bloodline on the jade slip had already returned to silence. He couldn't see anything special about it. "This jade slip is a bit strange." As he spoke, he also sent a strand of spiritual energy into the jade slip. When the spiritual energy entered the jade slip, it was like a stone sinking into the sea. There was no reaction at all. "It's really strange." Chu Tianfeng didn't give up. He sent another strand of spiritual energy into the jade slip. There was also no reaction. "There's no reaction, but it also won't bite me." He used Sikong Xing's words and played with the jade slip over and over again. "Of course there's no reaction." Sikong Xing looked at the jade slip with some fear. "That's the jade slip of our demon realm. The bloodline in the middle is the bloodline of the demon race. In other words, only we who have the bloodline of the demon race can use this jade slip." But she hesitated for a moment. She looked around at her companions who had fought side by side for many times, who had gone through life and death with her. She gritted her teeth and continued. "There are many demon clans, and their bloodlines are mixed. I can't use the jade scrolls of other clans." "You mean, unless we find the demon cultivator with the bloodline of this jade slip, we can't use it, right?" "Yes." Sikong Xing nodded vigorously. "That's right. But what?" Chu Tianfeng asked. "There's another possibility," Sikong Xing said. "That's the royal bloodline of the demon realm." Li Che didn't understand. "The royal bloodline of the demon realm?" "Yes," Sikong Xing said. "In our demon realm, the bloodline is respected. Almost all of the previous demon lords came from the royal bloodline. So if it's someone with the royal bloodline, even if it's not their own clan's jade slip, as long as it's not another royal bloodline's jade slip, they can still open it." And Sikong Xing hesitated and said, "If it's the royal bloodline of the current demon lord, even if it's another royal bloodline's jade slip, they can still use it. That means there's no hope for us to open the jade slip now?" Chu Tianfeng was helpless. Yes, Sikong Xing was also a bit helpless. Their demon race's bloodline was respected. Her Red Fox clan was considered a noble in the demon realm, but this jade slip looked quite extraordinary. And if it really mentioned 7 kills, it was very likely to belong to a certain royal bloodline. Then it really wasn't something she could touch. Meng Qi. Pei Mufeng took the jade slip from Chu Tianfeng and suddenly handed it to Meng Qi. Try it. Chapter 168. Meng Qi, give a try. Pei Mufeng opened his palm, and there was a small jade slip lying in it. The jade slip was yellow in color, and it looked very warm, probably because it had been rubbed for a long time. There was a bright red thread running through the center, which was probably the proof of Sikong Xing's demon bloodline. Meng Qi hesitated, then reached out and picked up the jade slip. The jade slip was slightly cold, but it warmed up when she touched it. It gently fell into her palm, and there was nothing wrong with it. This time, Sikong Xing was stunned. He looked at Meng Qi, then at Pei Mufeng, and couldn't help but ask, "You want Meng Qi to give it a try?" "Yes." Pei Mufeng nodded. But the bloodline backlash. Sikong Xing wanted to say something, but he closed his mouth again. Anyway, at most, it would be the same as Chu Tianfeng's. It wouldn't have any effect. She thought about it, and it wasn't a big deal. The bloodline backlash was a very painful thing for demon cultivators. Not only would they feel pain, but the feeling of being suppressed by a terrifying big shot was not something that everyone could bear. Okay. Meng Qi clenched her hand and held the jade slip. Before she could send in her spiritual energy, she suddenly heard a distant and somewhat strange sound. It sounded like the wind, but also like someone was whispering something. It was a sound that Meng Qi had never heard before. It was bleak and distant, as if it came from 10,000 years ago, or even the more distant ancient times. Then the sound became louder. Meng Qi could at least hear that the voice was indeed speaking, but it was speaking in a strange language that she had never heard before. The voice was still bleak and distant, with an indescribable sense of solemnity. The speed of speaking was not fast. After he repeated it a few times, Meng Qi could hear his tone clearly. However, she still didn't understand what the other party was saying. Meng Qi looked up and looked at the circle of friends around her, their faces full of expectation and curiosity. "How is it?" Chu Tianfeng was the most anxious. He rushed to ask, "Meng Qi, if you feel uncomfortable, just ignore it." Meng Qi nodded lightly at him, indicating that he understood. She then looked at Pei Mufeng. The swordsman's eyes were as calm as a lake and as bright as the stars. He looked at her calmly, as if telling her that no matter what happened next, he would not be surprised. Meng Qi's gaze finally landed on Sikong Xing's face. The woman in red looked at her with a pair of bright eyes and said worriedly, "Meng Qi, don't force yourself." Meng Qi opened her mouth. She tried her best to lower her voice, imitating the strange and difficult tone, and uttered the strange sentence that the other party kept repeating. Fortunately, the sentence was not long. Meng Qi had a good memory. Although she did not understand the meaning of the sentence at all, she felt that there was no problem with it when she repeated it. However, the voice in the jade slip was bleak and distant. Meng Qi's voice was clear and cold, like mountain spring water, lacking the solemnity. "Ayu Shuk Xiang." Sikong Xing's face instantly became extremely pale. Her big eyes were full of surprise, and a faint trace of fear overflowed from the depths of her eyes. Finally, it occupied her entire eyes, and even her expression became frightened. The tall body of the woman in red trembled slightly. Her usually cheerful voice became dry. Meng Qi, what did you say?" Meng Qi opened her mouth and repeated the sentence. Bang! Sikong Xing's soul left her body, and she directly knelt down. My lord! Her body trembled even more violently on the ground, as if she had seen the most frightening and awe-inspiring person in the world. Xing. Meng Qi quickly reached out and helped her up. "What's wrong?" Meng Qi. Chi. Sikong Xing grabbed her arm. Her small face was still pale, and her eyes were full of fear. She even looked behind her with some panic. "I am Chi. Meng Qi held her hand and said, "That sentence, Sikong Xing exclaimed in a low voice, and her body trembled again. It's okay. Meng Qi quickly hugged her and patted her back gently. He did not dare to ask any more questions. Chu Tianfeng and the others exchanged glances with each other. In fact, they were also very curious, but they also knew that they could not rush Si Kongxing in the presence of the Taoist priest. They tacitly formed a circle, carefully watching their surroundings while looking at the two women standing in each other's embrace. When Meng Qi raised his hand again, there was a faint aura flowing through his fingertips. His hand patted Si Kongxing's back again and again, and his voice seemed to be full of comforting power. This was a small spell commonly used by medical cultivators, the empty spirit spell. It could soothe people's hearts and make them calm down quickly. Si Kongxing quickly calmed down, but she still lay on Meng Qi's shoulder. She was taller than Meng Qi, so she put her chin on Meng Qi's shoulder and was about to bend down. Si Kongxing did not seem to care at all. He hugged her for a while more before gently letting go of her. Xing Xing. Meng Qi looked at Si Kongxing and asked worriedly, "Are you okay?" "Yes." Si Kongxing responded in a low voice. "It's my fault." Meng Qi looked apologetically at Si Kongxing, who rarely fell into a low voice. "I shouldn't have casually imitated that person's words. I scared you." He reached out and gently pinched Si Kongxing's face as he spoke. Si Kongxing's face turned pale again, and he asked, Who is that person? Just now you... He swallowed his saliva with some difficulty, and then slowly asked, "Did you learn that sentence from that person? Let's not talk about that person." Meng Qi waved his hand, not wanting to scare Si Kongxing again. "I'm fine." Si Kongxing let out a long breath and patted his chest. "I was just a little too sudden, so I was scared." She said, "I'm fine." "Really?" Meng Qi stared at her. Her face was still a little pale, but the fear in her eyes faded a lot. "I promise." Si Kongxing said, his voice becoming more lively. "Just now I was really caught off guard, that's why I was scared." Si Kongxing paused and then said, "The Yao realm is not like the 3,000 worlds where you Xiuzha live. The Yao realm and the Mo realm are the same," she explained. "They attach great importance to the hierarchy. In our Yao realm, bloodline is respected, because those with powerful bloodlines will cultivate faster, and it will be easier for them to absorb the Ling energy in the starlight. Those with nobler bloodlines who cultivate at the same time, 10 years later, may have higher cultivation than us by a great realm, or even more." So, Si Kongxing continued, "In the Yao realm, those with nobler bloodlines naturally have a deterrent effect on Yao Xiuzha with lower bloodlines. So that's how it is." Several people nodded. Among these people, except for Meng Qi, they all came from famous large sects of the 3,000 worlds and 4 worlds. Even Li Chei's Azure Sea Book Academy could rank in the top 10 of the Southern Land. The inheritances of these sects were naturally far superior to Meng Qi's Cool Breeze Valley. They had more or less heard about the Yao realm in their sections. It was just that they didn't go into as much detail as Si Kongxing. What Meng Qi said just now was the Yao language of the Yao realm's royal family. When the lower Yao Xiuzha heard an order issued in this Yao language, they couldn't resist at all. Si Kongxing couldn't help but stroke her chest again, looking like she still had some lingering fear. Then, Li Chei asked curiously, if someone learned the royal Yao language, wouldn't they be able to swindle and bully people in the Yao realm? "Huh, that's not right." He said, "If every clan in the Yao realm has their own language, then when you talk to us, are you specifically learning our human language? That's not right either." Without waiting for Si Kongxing to answer, Li Chei scratched his head first. "I've dealt with some Yao Xiuzha before, and I feel like I can understand their language." "How can it be that easy?" Si Kongxing said, "We usually speak like humans. The same goes for the demon Xiuzha in the demon realm." "But that's right." She emphasized, "This kind of Yao language represents the bloodline. If the Yao Xiuzha of that clan didn't learn it, they would be like me just now, suffering from the backlash of the bloodline." Si Kongxing didn't wait for Chu Tianfeng to speak, and guess what the other party wanted to say first. She quickly said, "You humans can't use the power of the bloodline. Even if you copy it, it won't have any deterrent effect on us." So just now Meng Qi, when she said this, she also felt a little strange. Logically speaking, if Meng Qi was just imitating the tone of the voice, she shouldn't be so afraid. Sikong Xing didn't say that when Meng Qi spoke just now, she really thought that a great sky demon of the royal family had descended. That kind of trembling and fear that even suppressed every strand of her hair couldn't be faked. She thought for a moment, then suddenly stood steadily, and then clenched her fists hard, and said to Meng Qi, "Meng Qi, say that sentence again." After Sikong Xing finished speaking, she even nodded hard at Meng Qi. "Forget it." Meng Qi waved his hand and said with a smile, "I haven't used my spiritual energy yet. I just held the jade slip and heard the sound. It shouldn't be anything." "No." Sikong Xing was stunned for a moment, then stood even more firmly and said stubbornly, "Meng Qi, say it again." Meng Qi looked at her helplessly. He could only open his mouth and repeat the sentence that she didn't understand at all. His voice was clear and cold. He was worried that he would scare Sikong Xing, so he deliberately made his voice gentle. When he heard it, it was like a cool breeze. Sikong Xing, who was standing steadily, swayed again. But this time, she was prepared. She didn't kneel down again. She only looked at Meng Qi with a pale face. "Xing Xing?" Meng Qi reached out to support her. "I'm fine." Sikong Xing shook her head. It took her a while to recover. She exhaled and said, "This is..." Sikong Xing thought for a moment, then said, "Yao Yu of the royal family, and one of the 4 royal families." "Then what does this sentence mean?" Meng Qi asked. "In my name, listen to my orders," Sikong Xing said slowly. She quickly said, "Meng Qi, if you go to the demon realm, once this sentence is said, the entire demon realm, except for the top great demon lords of the 4 royal families, no other demon clan will dare to disobey your orders." Meng Qi, she heard Sikong Xing's explanation just now, so she asked again, "Is what I said useful?" "Of course." Sikong Xing nodded with certainty. "No matter what you order me to do, I couldn't resist. If I didn't want to, the bloodline pressure would make me unable to move at all." Meng Qi's beautiful eyes flashed. He stared at Sikong Xing for a moment. Okay. Sikong Xing didn't want to recall that terrifying feeling. She urged Meng Qi, "Meng Qi, quickly look at what's written in the Jade Scroll." She said, "Don't worry. Since you can hear the bloodline order in the Jade Scroll, you can read the contents inside." "Okay." Meng Qi held the Jade Scroll again and slowly sent a wisp of spirit energy into it. She was very careful. She gently touched the Jade Scroll with her spirit energy, ready to withdraw immediately if something went wrong. But as soon as her spirit energy touched the Jade Scroll, a huge suction force seemed to come from inside and completely absorb her spirit energy. Meng Qi was stunned. This time, she sent more spirit energy into the Jade Scroll. The Jade Scroll was still unceremonious. It directly swallowed all the spirit energy she sent in. "How is it?" Chu Tianfeng stared at her and quickly asked. "It completely swallowed all the spirit energy I sent in," Meng Qi explained helplessly. "That's right." Sikong Xing clenched her left fist and hammered her right palm. "Meng Qi can unlock this Jade Scroll," she announced excitedly. "You have to send in more spirit energy." "Okay." Meng Qi simply sent in more spirit energy this time. The Jade Scroll was still unceremonious. It completely swallowed her spirit energy. This time, without Sikong Xing saying anything, Meng Qi seemed to feel the Jade Scroll telling her more. Meng Qi, the amount of spirit energy she sent in just now wasn't little. She was a Xiuzhe who had just reached Yuanying. Just now, she sent in 1/3 of her spirit energy into the Jade Scroll. The Jade Scroll actually wanted more? Meng Qi. Li Che looked at Meng Qi and reminded her, "Be careful. Don't try to be brave." Meng Qi nodded. If it was any other time, she probably wouldn't try. But right now, she couldn't. Ling Ji Qianbei was taken away by the 7-colored light. The Xiuzhe of the same generation who entered 10 Extremes Mountain all fell silent. This time, Meng Qi sent more than twice as much spirit energy into the Jade Scroll. Spirit energy surged in, but was instantly swallowed clean. Meng Qi, it still doesn't work? Sikong Xing asked. I reckon that this jade scroll looks down on us nascent soul newbies. Meng Qi smiled bitterly and joked. Her spiritual sea was already more than half empty. That jade scroll didn't even reveal anything. It was too different from the jade scrolls of the Trichiliocosm. The jade scrolls they used, even if they recorded very important inheritances, only needed a little bit of spirit energy to be used. Meng Qi took a deep breath. She took out 2 Northern Darkness pills and swallowed them. She sat down cross-legged. At the same time, she used the Northern Darkness mantra. Not long after, the spirit energy in her spiritual sea was full again. Meng Qi simply sat cross-legged and sent all her spirit energy into the jade scroll. There was no response. Meng Qi, she didn't believe it. Meng Qi didn't just want to break the formation. This jade scroll was like a bottomless pit. It aroused her competitive spirit. She casually took out her medicine knife and held it horizontally in her hand. Meng Qi. Sikong Xing squatted beside her. Her other friend were also sitting or squatting, looking at her. Meng Qi had a rare bit of temper. She lightly snorted. The medicine knife in her right hand moved nimbly on the ground beside her. She quickly drew an exquisitely structured formation. Sikong Xing, she was a Yao cultivator after all. She knew more about formations. Even so, she couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air when she saw Meng Qi draw such a complicated formation. She didn't know how to do it anyway. Yin Xian raised his eyebrows. Their Hidden Moon Valley was a sect that had existed for tens of thousands of years since the ancient times. Their understanding of formations was much greater than normal Xiuzhia. They also knew some of the ancient formation cultivators' postures when they fought. The way Meng Qi held the medicine knife and drew the formation reminded him of the ancient legends. Was it those formation cultivators who were powerful enough to move unhindered? Ancient formation cultivators? Yin Xian's eyes suddenly lit up. Meng Qi, Chu Tianfeng asked, what are you doing? I don't have enough spirit energy. Meng Qi smiled, but I have enough spirit stones. As she spoke, she threw out 6 spirit stones with a swish sound, and they were all Xian spirit stones. They were embedded in the 6 corners of the formation. Meng Qi held the jade scroll and stepped into the formation. The formation suddenly shone brightly. The spirit energy in the Xian spirit stones was instantly sucked out and entered the jade scroll in Meng Qi's hand. Ha! She chuckled and threw out 6 more Xian spirit stones. Then 6 more. 6 more. Chu Tianfeng, Sikong Xing, and the others were dumbfounded. Sikong Xing's father was a famous rich man in the Yao world. He was the richest man in the Crimson Fox clan. He doted on her very much, but she didn't have that many Xian spirit stones. After Meng Qi threw out a total of 108 Xian spirit stones, the formation's light finally weakened. Then, Sikong Xing and the others saw that the jade scroll in Meng Qi's hand lit up with a soft light. A thin bloodline drilled from the jade scroll into Meng Qi's palm. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.